conclusion, pipelines are essential to the energy security of the United States. If we don't have the necessary infrastructure to deliver oil and natural gas from American producers to energy consumers and utilities, we undercut our energy security and force reliance on our adversaries for energy. I'm not alone in this. I'll point out that the Progressive Policy Institute has a paper that specifically points, and this isn't a conservative right-leaning group, Progressive Policy Institute has a paper pointing to the need to build out our energy infrastructure and pipeline infrastructure in this country and supports natural gas. I welcome the committee to read that at some point in time on both sides of the aisle. So I look forward to our hearing today and recognize Ranking Member DeGette for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And before I start my opening statement, I just want to take a moment of personal privilege because we heard earlier this week that you won't be running for re-election. And I just want to let you know from my side of the aisle and for me personally, I've loved working with you. We've been admirable adversaries from time to time, but we have also worked very closely on a number of issues. And to that end, I really hope we can pass our nuclear bill so that it can be your legacy as you leave this. Because you've really been a wonderful chairman, so
well,
I think we should.
Thank you so much for that. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. We got 11 months worth of work to do, and the bills you mentioned, and some more work. We work in a bipartisan way to get through this Congress, signed by the president, will be a legacy we can all hang our hats on. So thank you so much for that. I look forward to working with you.
And now here we go into this hearing. So I'm glad we're finally having this hearing on pipeline safety. The Pipeline Safe and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, oversees the safety of nearly 3.4 million miles of pipelines that reach across the country. These pipelines carry hazardous materials like oil, gas, and other means of energy production to go where they need to go. They are part of our energy system, ensuring the light comes on when you turn on the switch. In an ideal world, the average American would be blissfully unaware of pipelines because they would be quietly doing their job for us. But unfortunately, as we've seen all too often, pipelines can be very dangerous, especially when we neglect them. On average, there are more than 600 pipeline safety incidents a year, and these incidents can be fatal and are devastating to families and communities. Congress, of course, is responsible for reauthorizing PHMSA's pipeline safety activities. And to prevent those incidents, Congress must take a more active oversight role. PHMSA's pipeline safety program reauthorization actually expired in September last year. In response to the then impending lapse, Ranking Member Pallone and I sent a letter last September to Chair Rogers and to Chair Duncan requesting this subcommittee immediately hold an oversight hearing of PHMSA's pipeline safety programs. The letter also expressed our disappointment in the lack of bipartisan engagement in reauthorizing those vital programs, because this is something that could be bipartisan. But despite that, we haven't seen any action until today, when unfortunately we seem to be taking a step backwards. The only action that the majority took on pipeline safety in 2023 was releasing this partisan draft bill that we're considering today, the, quote, Pipeline Safety Modernization and Expansion Act of 2023, a bill that, despite its name including, quote, safety, has several sections that are completely unrelated to PHMSA pipeline safety. That bill rather contains provisions to increase the construction and operation of pipelines. It would allow FERC authority to grant authorizations to modernize existing pipelines and construct new pipelines. It would streamline the permitting process, all while authorizing a funding level that's 18% below current funding levels, stripping PHMSA of critical funding and safety measures, despite the bill's branding. And if the cuts alone weren't enough, the bill also places additional burdens on the administration's pipeline safety program, burdens which are unfunded. PHMSA has an important job in ensuring safety and protecting communities, and they require full funding to carry this out. Fortunately, in contrast with what we're seeing proposed by the majority, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act invested $1 billion in the safety of natural gas distribution pipelines. The President's fiscal year 24 budget also requested a 20% increase for PHMSA's pipeline safety budget to support this important work. Now, the Energy and Commerce Committee unfortunately, since we should have full jurisdiction over this, we do share it with the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And we can look to the T&I Committee for an example of bipartisanship and adherence to regular order. Last December, following their oversight hearing in March 2023, the committee released a bipartisan pipeline safety reauthorization bill. Both sides weighed in to provide a common-sense solution that would work to ensure no lapse in the transportation of energy while also focusing on safety and environmental protection. T&I aren't the only ones who know that pipeline safety demands a bipartisan process. In their letter to the chairman and myself, the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America noted that, quote, as the subcommittee begins considering this measure, we request it be advanced through a bipartisan process, as we believe it's the best way to ensure pipeline safety reauthorization legislation becomes law. Really, I find myself not always agreeing with the Natural Gas Association of America, but in this case, I don't think I could have put it better. The partisanship from our committee only serves to increase the amount of time it will take to reauthorize important pipeline safety measures. It's vital to fund this program to ensure pipeline safety and to protect our communities. And so I stand ready, as usual, to work on a bipartisan reauthorization of PHMSA's pipeline safety program. And with that, I yield back.
Well, I agree with the gentlelady that this ought to be just in this jurisdiction, but unfortunately, we have multiple jurisdictions here to deal with, and so we'll work on PHMSA going forward. This is a legislative hearing. We're going to have a markup at some point in time, and look forward to looking at whatever you guys may have to offer. I'll now go to the chair of the full committee, Chair Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Today we're discussing legislation that will modernize and expand our nation's pipeline infrastructure to improve safety and lower fuel prices for the American people. As I think about the Arctic blast that swept across the country last week and the cold front moving across the Northeast this week, it is critical that Americans have access to affordable, reliable, and abundant supplies of energy to heat our homes and fuel our vehicles. We are able to access this life-saving energy across the country because of our pipeline infrastructure, which is the safest and the most efficient way to transport liquid fuels, including gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, propane, and natural gas. Experts agree that global demand for liquid fuels will continue to grow through at least 2050. As the world's #1 producer of oil and natural gas, we have an opportunity to cement America's energy leadership for decades to come. Today, the U.S. has more than 3.4 million miles of pipeline. To meet growing energy demands, we must modernize and expand our pipeline infrastructure. The U.S. has been blessed with an abundance of natural resources right under our feet, which we've been able to harness as a result of free market principles and an entrepreneurial spirit that is uniquely American. We should be embracing this and building on it to enhance America's energy security and competitive edge. Maximizing our energy advantage requires that we expand and modernize our energy infrastructure. The Energy and Commerce Committee plays a key role in strengthening our nation's pipeline safety laws and modernizing the permitting process. Today, we're hoping to continue that legacy as we consider the Pipeline Safety Modernization and Expansion Act of 2024 discussion draft authored by Chair Duncan. This important legislation would reauthorize the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, for 5 years, streamlining the permitting process for new pipeline projects, protecting fuel choice by prohibiting states and local gas bans, making energy more affordable and reliable by expanding existing pipelines, and preparing for the energy mix of the future, one that will include more natural gas, hydrogen, carbon capture, and sequestration, and so much more. I look forward to working with Chair Duncan and all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to build on American energy leadership and move this important bill forward. Our economy, our national security, the stability of global markets, and the environment will only benefit from continued American energy leadership. Today's hearing will give PHMSA and pipeline operators an opportunity to provide their views on as we work to perfect the bill. And before I yield back, I too want to take a moment to acknowledge my good friend, Subcommittee Chair Jeff Duncan's terrible announcement yesterday, announcing his retirement. So grateful for Chairman Duncan's friendship and his service to the people of South Carolina. You've led on a number of solutions that are top of mind for the people that you represent, but also for the entire country. Especially appreciate your leadership and voice on these energy issues as we think about the importance of American energy independence and meeting critical energy needs today and into the future. You've led on unleashing nuclear energy, ensuring pipeline safety that we're working on today, and we're grateful. We're grateful for your commitment to public service, and we will miss your leadership on this committee. We wish you the best.
Thank you, Chair Rogers, and thanks, everyone. I'll now go to the ranking member, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and let me just also express my regret on Chairman Jeff Duncan's retirement. And I sincerely mean that, he's always been pleasant, he's always tried to work with us whenever possible. Is it appropriate to say is it still appropriate to say you kind of epitomize the Southern gentleman, or is that like?
That would be gracious of you to say that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, it's true. It's very true. So I do regret you're not running again. But let me just say, today, I have to say that I'm not happy with the bill that's up today. I know we're finally having a hearing on pipeline safety, and the most recent reauthorization of pipeline safety programs at the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, expired over 100 days ago. And all our Republican majority has to offer today is a partisan draft bill that's unintroduced and unchanged since they released it in July. There was no effort to work together, no effort to sit down and discuss shared priorities, and no heads up at all that the Republicans are putting together this draft. And this is a stark departure from the path that Democrats forged when we were in the majority during the last reauthorization process. We sat down, negotiated with our Republican colleagues for months to try to agree on a bipartisan bill, even postponing a committee markup because we didn't yet have bipartisan agreement. And it was only after months of detailed discussions reached an impasse that we ultimately moved a Democratic bill through the committee that had a strong commitment to enhance pipeline safety. So today we're considering a partisan bill masquerading, in my opinion, as a pipeline safety bill, when in fact it will only lead to the construction of more dangerous pipelines. Republican priorities are on full display today. Do the bidding of corporate polluters while putting the safety of our communities at risk. Just last week, a natural gas leak in Fort Worth, Texas, caused an explosion that injured 21 people and destroyed 2 floors of a hotel. A year and a half ago, an LNG facility also in Texas suffered a massive explosion due to what PHMSA later found to be inadequate procedures. The reality is that there are over 600 pipeline safety incidents every year, which result in an average of 31 injuries and 10 deaths, and that's just simply unacceptable. And that's why I was so disappointed that Republicans didn't even attempt to work with us on a bipartisan pipeline safety reauthorization bill that could actually become law. And this discussion draft, I think, is reckless. It would gut state oversight of pipelines built within their boundaries, encroaching on states' rights. It also prevents states and municipalities from deciding to move away from natural gas if they so choose. Even more radically, the bill actually cuts funding for pipeline safety. It delivers a $42 million annual cut to PHMSA's authorized programs from the levels in the last bipartisan authorization that was signed into law by the last Republican president. And this bill asks PHMSA to do more with less. Like the vast majority of the legislation this subcommittee has acted on in this Congress, this bill will never become law. It's yet another proof that, in my opinion, that House Republicans are not able to govern, and it underscores why this Congress is on pace to be one of the least productive since the Great Depression. And all of this stands in stark contrast to the bipartisan process that the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee implemented last year. They spent months holding serious bipartisan negotiations to craft a bipartisan bill, and they were able to move this bill out of committee last year. As with any bipartisan legislation, neither side likely got everything it wanted in the final bill, but it garnered strong support from Democrats and Republicans. It also authorized $80 million more each year for pipeline safety programs than this bill does, and it was free of the poison pill riders that make up so much of this bill. So frankly, I don't believe that Republicans on this committee would cede ground to another committee on an issue where we share jurisdiction, and as was said, where we should have sole jurisdiction. It also defies logic to continue to move forward with a partisan process while another committee has crafted a bipartisan compromise that could potentially become law. And it's unfortunate that committee Republicans have chosen partisanship on something as important as keeping our communities safe from dangerous pipelines. It's our responsibility to ensure PHMSA has the resources and authorities it needs to keep nearly 3.4 million miles of oil, gas, and other pipelines nationwide safe. This discussion draft will not do that. So I'm just hoping that, when we actually go to markup, that this changes and that we can actually work together and finally bring a bipartisan bill to the committee and ultimately to the floor that, really provides for pipeline safety and lives up to the name of pipeline safety. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the ranking member, and I reiterate, we look forward to trying to work with you guys. Legislative hearing will go to markup hopefully soon, and love to look at any sort of recommendations, changes, see how we can make this a truly bipartisan effort, and that's the spirit of the committee as always. We'll now conclude with members' opening statements. Chair would like to remind members pursuant to the committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. So I want to thank our witnesses for being here today and taking time to testify. Each witness will have the opportunity, and we only have one, to give an opening testimony and then answer questions. Today we have Deputy Administrator Tristan Brown with PHMSA, and we thank you for being here. We look forward to your testimony, and then we also look forward to a good round of questions from all the members. So you're recognized for 5 minutes, Mr. Brown.
Great. Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Duncan. Thank you, Ranking Member DeGette. Thank you, Chair Rogers, Ranking Member Pallone. I'm pleased to be here to testify on the Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA's pipeline safety program, and appreciate the subcommittee's interest in strengthening pipeline safety and working towards a reauthorization bill that we can get signed into law. Safety is the top priority for the Department of Transportation and for PHMSA. Specifically, PHMSA is responsible, as was mentioned, for overseeing the safe transportation of hazardous materials via pipelines, but also via all other modes of transportation: planes, trains, trucks, automobiles, vessels, and the safe design, operations, and maintenance of nearly 3.4 million miles of oil, gas, and other hazardous liquids and other hazardous pipelines, including hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and other emerging fuels of the future. PHMSA's oversight of hazardous materials via other modes includes the oversight of nearly 1 in 10 goods that are transported in the United States. Everything from nuclear waste to lithium-ion batteries to explosives used in excavation, mining, and energy production. PHMSA also chairs multiple international standards-making bodies that set the global standards and framework for the safe and efficient transport of these materials across borders and around the world, valued in the trillions of dollars. Under Secretary Buttigieg's leadership, PHMSA has been focused on executing bipartisan congressional mandates in the PIPES Act of 2020, implementing historic infrastructure investments from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law of 2021, and strengthening our safety mission and ensuring that the United States has the safest, most efficient, and competitive transportation system in the world. From the standpoint of the volume of work before us as an agency, the challenges in carrying out our safety mission have never been greater. We oversee an aging infrastructure that requires robust maintenance and, when needed, repair and replacement. Most of the cross-country pipeline infrastructure was built shortly after World War II, meaning many pipelines are over 80 years old, and there are even a few gas distribution segments that were installed during the Civil War era, more than 150 years ago, which are being modernized as part of the President's Bipartisan Infrastructure Law grant program that we stood up last year, including grants in your district, Mr. Chairman, and 3 other members of the subcommittee here. Nearly 2/3 of the energy we consume in the United States is transported via pipeline. Over the past few decades, growth in the energy production in the United States has increased to record levels. Concurrently, U.S. transportation of these products has necessarily increased, and exports of energy have also reached record levels. This has placed new and heightened demands on our pipeline and refined product storage infrastructure, as well as export facilities, such as liquefied natural gas facilities, that PHMSA also regulates. To meet congressional directives to improve efforts to attract and retain pipeline engineers and inspectors, PHMSA has undertaken new recruitment and retention efforts and has kept its focus on the hiring targets included in the Pipes Act of 2020, both for inspectors as well as for the regulatory development personnel that have helped lead the agency to some of its most productive years in terms of both finalizing new standards and enforcement of our standards, as well as in a reduction in the trend in hazardous materials incidents, including in pipeline incidents. In closing, I would like to thank you again for the opportunity to engage with you on the critical issues facing PHMSA and in turn facing a major component of the largest, most sophisticated energy transportation system in the world. Each of the areas I outlined in my written testimony are areas in which the rest of the world looks to America for leadership. Leadership in the marketplace for hazardous materials products, leadership for establishing safety rules that countries around the world have told me they often adopt in whole, given our robust process, to improve their own pipeline safety and environmental protection and mitigation. Leadership in the rule of law when it comes to disputes and compliance, leadership in research and innovation and new technologies to improve safety and environmental performance that are sold domestically and exported around the world, leadership in transparency and engagement with affected communities, which countries also look to as a new standard in leadership in the efficiencies for all the work that we do. This work is a result of our collaboration with the committees that authorize and fund our agency, but the kudos for all of our achievements go to the more than 600 full-time and 200 contractors that make up our, what I believe is the most unsung agency in the federal government. With that, I can't yield back any time because I'm a few seconds over here, so thank you.
Well, thanks for your testimony. Is that a stormtrooper on your sock?
That is my space socks. That's an astronaut.
Okay.
Which, one of the other things we do is we regulate spacecraft at the agency.
One thing about this committee, we like a little levity from time to time. So, listen, thank you for your testimony, and it's very informative. I'll now go into the question and answering session and begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. You know, PHMSA is Department of Transportation agency responsible for developing and enforcing federal safety regulations for the nation's pipeline infrastructure. As you mentioned, that's nearly 3.4 million miles of pipelines. We've got an abundant supply of clean, affordable, reliable oil and natural gas, and we need safe and reliable pipeline infrastructure to transport these essential resources. Safe transportation should be PHMSA's main priority. We've seen a lot of derailments and other things happen, and it just points to the fact that pipelines do it safer than other modes of transportation. I'm concerned that PHMSA is losing its focus on safety and prioritizing climate change regulations instead. Mr. Brown, PHMSA is a safety regulator, not a climate or environmental enforcement agency. Would you agree with that statement?
No, historically the agency, since its founding, and actually even before it was founded in the 2000s, actually dating back to the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, we had a major environmental component to our agency's work. It is the environment, the protection of the environment is in our mission statement. It's in the statutes that you, Congress, have enacted and directed us to protect the environment, property, and ensure the safety of the assets that we oversee. So,
well, I'd make the argument that that was mainly focused on pipeline spills and that sort of thing. So I'm not going to get into the weeds on that. On May 5th, 2023, PHMSA proposed a new rule for gas pipeline leak detection and repair pursuant to Section 113 of the Pipes Act of 2020. By law, PHMSA is required to conduct a risk assessment and cost-benefit analysis, so all new regulations are cost-effective. I believe PHMSA exceeded its statutory authority with this rule because it expanded PHMSA's jurisdiction to include non-jurisdictional pipelines and exaggerated climate-related benefits to justify a high compliance cost. Has PHMSA estimated the compliance cost of the proposed regulation?
We have, and that's part of our draft notice of proposed rulemaking, which we sought public comment on, and we are currently in the statutory review committee process, getting input, again, from our statutory advisory committee.
Is part of that looking into how much this regulation will increase energy prices for the American people?
Part of that is trying to estimate the costs and benefits to consumers from the rule, yes.
How do you put did PHMSA use the social cost of carbon to justify the high cost of this regulation?
That is part of, yes, that is social cost of methane, which is sort of the equivalent to that for estimating social costs. And so that's actually determined through an interagency process.
Yeah, just a fancy way of saying social cost of carbon, changing the word to methane. But this regulation also mentions the use of so-called equity benefits. Does PHMSA have statutory authority to rely on equity benefits to justify high compliance cost?
It has the ability to estimate the benefits to ensuring equity and fairness in the carrying out of our laws, yes.
And who has the, I guess, ability to estimate that fairly? I mean, that's almost subjective, right?
There's certainly an amount of subjectivity in really all the work that I think federal agencies do, but our goal is a fundamental American principle that as we carry out our laws, that we do so fairly and equitably for all Americans.
Well,
and that historically has not occurred.
Well, that's why I think pipeline safety reauthorization and direction from Congress on what those parameters should be in defining your mission is so important. It sounds like PHMSA is using climate change and so-called equity benefits to justify burdensome regulations that will raise the price of energy for all Americans. In my opinion, PHMSA exceeding its congressional authority in issuing regulations that have high probability of being thrown out in court. We'll see. It seems that PHMSA is compromising safety to appease environmental and social activists. I'm almost out of time. I've said my part, and I'll now go to the ranking member for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Brown, thank you for being here today. Thanks for your agencies leaning in on implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I think there's some really great investments we can do there. So everybody recognizes how important PHMSA is to ensuring pipeline safety and from that, the safety of our communities. So I'm going to ask you, nearly 2/3 of the energy the U.S. consumes is transported versus via pipeline. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Now, much of the pipeline infrastructure, as you stated in your written testimony and also verbally today, is aging. Is that right?
That is correct.
What approximately what is the age of the pipelines?
We've got 3.4 million miles of mostly that's distribution, but for interstate transmission, you're looking at nearly 80 years old.
Okay, yeah, that's what you had said, 80 years old average. So in its fiscal year 2024 budget, the Biden administration requested a 20% increase in PHMSA's budget. Can you talk about why PHMSA needs those resources to meet its safety mission and what it's going to do with it?
Yeah, well, as both the chair of the subcommittee and full committee mentioned, the amount of production of energy that moves through the facilities that we regulate is drastically increased in recent years. And so we have a much bigger job to oversee, take any sort of subsector of the entities that we regulate. On the hazardous materials side, whether it's electric vehicle batteries, lithium-ion batteries that we regulate, but also on the pipeline side, whether LNG facilities, an increase in LNG exports and LNG export facilities. These are major complex assets, and we operate on an extremely lean budget.
So you're not just increasing the budget because of the excuse of climate, is that right?
Absolutely not. Safety
Okay.
is our top priority.
Safety, okay. Can you talk a little bit about the benefits that Americans can expect to see going forward from the Natural Gas Distribution Infrastructure Safety and Modernization Grant Program that you had referenced?
Yeah, that is part of the President's Bipartisan Infrastructure Law enacted in 2021. This is our first ever infrastructure grant program focused on basically addressing the highest risk legacy pipe, dating back in some cases 150-year-old pipe. So we are providing grants to community-owned systems. These are in statute, historically disadvantaged communities. In the first round, I think it was roughly upwards of 60% rural, and the rest urban communities. We're identifying leaks and leak-prone pipe, fixing those leaks. So the grants can be used both for leak detection equipment as well as repairing or in some cases replacing pipe. As I mentioned in the Chairman's District, we're replacing 8 miles of pipe, I believe in your home community system, as well as 700 service lines of legacy high-risk pipe.
Thank you. I want to talk about some parts of the bill that I don't think really belong here, and this is the rapid response section of my questions. The first one is, Section 3C of the draft bill introduces aquifer exemptions to Class 6 wells used for sequestering carbon dioxide. Does this have anything to do with PHMSA's pipeline safety authorities, yes or no?
That is not within our jurisdiction, no.
Oh, it's not within your jurisdiction, okay. Now, Section 9 of the draft bill prohibits states or municipalities from restricting transportation and distribution of certain energy products. Does this have anything to do with PHMSA's pipeline safety authorities?
No, ma'am.
Now, Section 10 of the draft bill would infringe on states' rights under the Clean Water Act to decide whether or not to issue permits for certain pipelines. Does that have anything to do with PHMSA's pipeline safety authorities?
No, we do not issue permits.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, this is what I was talking about in my opening statements. I don't think these belong in a pipeline safety bill, and I hope we can negotiate that as we move towards markup. And with 26 seconds left, I yield back.
Generally yields back. Now go to Mr. Latta for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for this very important hearing that we're having today, because as you've mentioned, what we transport across this country safely is absolutely essential to our economy. Deputy Administrator, I'm proud to have worked on the Protecting Our Infrastructure of Pipelines and Enhancing Safety, the PIPES Act of 2020. The PIPES Act created several updates for lead detection and repair requirements, report schedules for completion of outstanding rulemaking, and strengthened safety requirements for distribution and transmission of pipelines. Unfortunately, PHMSA is behind on many of these requirements. Would you please provide the committee with an update of these overdue congressional mandates and regulations?
Yeah, so we had we're tracking 36 mandates from the 2020 PIPES Act. Just for context and benefit of the committee, there were 19 mandates in the previous version of the PIPES Act, our previous reauthorization. So we've completed over half of our mandates from that, and we're near completion on the rest of them.
Let me ask you, when you say tracking, how do you define tracking?
Well, it's part of the 2020 PIPES Act. The law directed us to provide monthly updates on our website. This is something most agencies do not do, but we began doing that for our standards and rulemakings that we are working. So we track and track for the public and allow for monthly updates on progress.
Okay. And as also as part of the PIPES Act, PHMSA is required to hold at least 4 advisory committee meetings per year for its gas pipeline advisory committee. Since January 2021, there have only been 3 meetings. Do you believe these meetings hold value, and if so, why have there only been 3 meetings since that time?
Yeah, I do believe they hold value, and in those meetings, the committees, which are represented by 5 industry representatives, 5 public representatives, and 5 other government agency representatives, they really work through section by section and provide expertise from those diverse members. So I think they do provide value. They also contribute, though, to a slower process than a standard rulemaking process in another agency. So there's a trade-off there. Those meetings require a fair amount of coordination to get 15 people in a room, not to mention all of our staff in the room. So historically, it's taken months to just, in modern times, schedule those meetings. We're trying to make them efficient, not just hold a meeting for the sake of holding a meeting, but to actually get work done, particularly given the volume of mandates that we get from.
Well, you know, I always want to make sure that, you know, we're just not having meetings to have meetings, but one of the things about having these meetings and these forums is to give us a more transparency out there for the public. And I think it's important on that. And I know that trying to get people together, but again, if people commit to being on a committee or some kind of a commission and working forward, you know, that's something, a commitment they make. And in my opinion, if they're not committed to doing it, then they need to, you know, get somebody else out there to do it. But I think it's really important that that we do have that transparency on these forums. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now go to Ms. Matsui for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Administrator Brown, thank you for being here today to address these all-important issues of safety. In the T&I committee hearing last summer, you said that PHMSA is being asked to do more with less. Natural gas infrastructure has tripled, and we may soon see the rapid growth of new pipeline networks for transporting carbon dioxide and hydrogen. Mr. Brown, in 2 sentences, can you briefly describe some of the unique challenges and concerns surrounding carbon dioxide pipelines?
Yeah, carbon dioxide is an odorless and colorless gas that is heavier. So it when released into the environment, it can stay low to the ground, and it can be an asphyxiant. So that is a little bit unique compared to other products that either pool on the ground or essentially evaporate into the atmosphere. So it's unique in that context, among other things.
Okay. Now, what about the unique challenges and concerns relating to hydrogen pipelines?
Yeah, hydrogen is a highly flammable product, and it's actually when it combusts, it can be very difficult to see a flame of a hydrogen flame. So again, when responding to an incident, a rupture, it can be very difficult to for first responders who are not familiar with that to respond to an incident.
Okay, thank you. If there is a significant increase in the number and kinds of pipelines that PHMSA oversees, would that result in a significant increase in PHMSA's funding and staffing needs? Yes or no?
Not significant to the amount that we're expecting for the build-out, given the bipartisan infrastructure law investments and the Inflation Reduction Act investments, upwards of $100 billion.
Okay. If PHMSA's workload increases significantly, but your staffing and funding remains the same, in one word, will that increase or decrease the risk of an accident?
Overall, it would increase the risk that it doesn't receive the oversight from us.
Okay, thank you. We're here today to consider the Pipeline Safety Modernization and Expansion Act, which would reauthorize PHMSA's pipeline safety programs. And yet, after everything Mr. Brown just told us, this bill would actually cut PHMSA's funding by 18%. Mr. Brown, how would an 18% reduction in funding affect PHMSA's ability to ensure the safety of U.S. pipelines?
Well, given that we've been continued to be stretched thin, I would say significantly reduce the ability to mitigate the risk and really to ensure the safe and expansion of the emerging fuels of the future that will power our economy and allow America to continue to be the global leader in energy products and hazardous materials.
So, in one word then, would this 18% cut in funding increase or decrease the amount of time PHMSA takes to approve new pipeline permits or undertake new rulemakings?
Decrease.
Increase or?
Sorry, increase the amount of time it would take would be increase.
Okay. How would this affect PHMSA's ability to respond to the new challenges of CO2 and hydrogen pipelines?
it would hinder our abilities.
Okay. Last year, PHMSA announced a proposed rulemaking that would update leak detection requirements for natural gas pipelines. While natural gas burns cleaner than coal, if natural gas is released directly into the atmosphere, it can have an even larger climate impact than coal. How do PHMSA's funding and staffing shortages affect your agency's ability to detect and address methane leaks?
Well, in recent years, there's been a massive increase in the technologies deployed globally, from satellites to cars to individuals tracking methane emissions that just previously weren't really accounted for. And so we get an influx of, hey, have you checked this out? And of course, we want to investigate any leak that could potentially be a safety hazard. And so, part of this context of our increased focus on climate is that the entire marketplace is focusing on emissions that previously weren't tracked, and we're tracking them now.
Okay. I don't have much time left, so I yield back the balance of my time.
Joan yields back. I'll now go to Mr. Guthrie for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the time, and thank you for being here, Deputy Administrator Brown. My first question, at a White House press conference on May the 11th, Secretary Granholm was asked about the feasibility of using rail to transport fuel to communities affected by the Colonial pipeline incident. And she responded that while other options were being explored, pipe is the best way to go to get fuel to impacted communities. So what does government data say about pipeline safety trends, and how does pipelines compare to other modes of transportation in terms of safety?
As the Chair mentioned, the volume that you can move through a pipe and on sort of a per unit basis, there is a high level of safety. Obviously, if there's a problem and it's in your backyard, that doesn't provide a lot of solace. Fortunately, they are rare, but our goal is 0 incidents, and we are far from that.
But pipelines are far safer than railroads.
On a per unit basis for transportation, that's I think the report established that.
Okay, thanks. My second question, many of PHMSA's regulatory requirements are decades old. As we have heard today, many of the reforms from the Pipes Act of 2020 have not been implemented. I think you mentioned a schedule of implementing them. But for example, the Pipes Act authorized PHMSA to establish a pipeline safety enhancement program to demonstrate the effectiveness of new pipeline safety technologies and analytic methods. However, my understanding is no pipeline operators have applied to PHMSA under the program as it's been implemented. Is that accurate? And do you have a reason why you think?
And I think the reason why, well, and to provide further context, we asked, open it up to the public of how should we implement this. We have statutory requirements that apply here, and I think there's some dispute in the drafting on that front. So we're trying to figure out how can you make sure to account for the environmental impacts, which presumably would be good for these new innovative technologies and benefit the environment. How do you account for that? And then how do you account for an equivalent level of safety? That's something I think everybody in the room wants, and we want that too. So it's just how do we implement it? And we'd be glad to work with you and others on that, and just really appreciate there's been leadership on the committee here in drafting that thoughtful piece of the legislation.
Do you think once that's worked through that people will sign up for those meetings?
We hope so. That was
Program,
the intent of I believe, y'all in drafting it, so we hope so.
Okay, good. And so do you think current regulations are conducive to adopting new technologies that will improve pipe? You said, how do we get environmental benefit at a reasonable cost, and how do we improve safety? And do you think the current regulatory environment is satisfactory, or do you think it needs to be improved?
No, I think there's lots of room for improvement, and I think probably most people in the room would agree with that too.
So what do you think would be the most?
Well, for example, there are voluntary standards that industry comes to that increase safety. We have to go through a pretty lengthy process, including scheduling a meeting, can take months just to review what are essentially consensus-based standards and then incorporate them by reference in our regulations. Certainly, we could streamline that. Maybe we wouldn't need a committee meeting. Maybe we have a short notice and comment period just in case anybody has any objection. Maybe you do an interim final rule. Again, all of those things would just allow for a more streamlined process to allow for consensus-based progress.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time, and that does conclude my questions. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I want to just correct for the record the funding levels. The draft keeps the funding level flat to prior year funding levels. So we're not cutting PHMSA's budget, but the draft does give more money, PHMSA's funding, to the states where the inspectors and the engineers are actually working on the ground. So, of course, we authorize, appropriators appropriate, and we'll see what the funding levels end up being, but just for the record. I'll now go to my friend, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Deputy Administrator Brown, for joining us today. In the past, we have been able to come together to support pipeline safety reauthorizations because we can all agree on the important work that PHMSA does to keep Americans safe. But the potential for strong bipartisanship falls apart when these reauthorization efforts become more interested in pipeline industry promotion rather than pipeline industry safety regulation. So I hope that moving forward, we will stay much more narrowly focused on PHMSA's primary mission rather than infringing on the rights of state and local governments. So, Administrator Brown, let me ask you about another aspect of the role of state governments. Can you explain a little about that relationship between PHMSA and state regulators, and what is the role of states in ensuring pipeline safety?
So about 85% of the mileage that we oversee is inspected by state programs or state inspectors, which we fund. Congress has authorized us to fund up to 80% of their state budgets. That's the authorization level. However, the amount of funding that we have to distribute to the states has really dropped from somewhere in 70% range just a few years ago down into the low 60%, in some cases lower than that range. So the president's budget includes a request for full funding to ensure what the chair just noted, where most of the inspections occur to inspect and enforce, to ensure compliance with the standards that PHMSA establishes.
So are states primarily responsible for both larger intrastate pipelines and gas distribution systems?
Correct.
Okay, and what are some of the challenges states face to being effective regulators?
Well, they have the same challenge that we have, which is a much bigger footprint of assets, of energy. When we're producing and transporting record amounts of fuel, they've got more, a bigger challenge. And of course, the aging infrastructure continues to age. And you've got a lot of construction projects happening, both from repair and replacement standpoint, as well as new construction of pipe.
And your testimony mentioned that PHMSA provides grants to states to support their pipeline safety programs. What are those funds used for?
So those are primarily used for hiring of and salaries of pipeline inspectors, but there are a whole host of other things that state programs do, from public education to ensuring one of the largest threats to pipeline infrastructure and other underground assets such as fiber optics and telecommunications, excavation damages. So these are inadvertent. Often in the case of excavating and construction or just digging in your yard. So states also support those programs as well.
Thank you. And how important is it that federal funding to ensure these state programs have the resources and capacity to carry out their responsibilities?
I think it's a paramount importance, and I'm glad to hear maybe there's a growing consensus around that. They really do need additional support. A lot of state budgets have struggled to keep up, and so it's a small amount relative, I think, to the federal budget and even to some extent to our budget. So the impact is tremendous. I will say too, on a hiring front, just anecdotally and talking to some of these state programs, they've struggled in a red-hot economy, in a red-hot job market. They can't hire inspectors at the salaries they're able to pay with their limited budgets. So allowing them to pay, comparative wages will help ensure they're able to hire sufficient staff to oversee this massive infrastructure.
And you indicated for fiscal year 2024 that the Biden administration requested increased funding. Have historic funding levels not kept up with the growing workload being put upon
Yeah.
state safety inspectors?
Nowhere near. Certainly not, I'd say, in the last decade kept up, no.
And do you think there might be safety consequences if the federal government reduces its support to state partners?
Yeah, and I think there's some examples we're glad to maybe provide for the record, but where we've seen some challenges at the state level in the large oversight responsibilities that they have.
Well, we know that state governments play that important role as a co-regulator, so we should be doing all we can to ensure they have the resources and personnel necessary to uphold their responsibilities. And with that, I thank you, and I thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Call before you dig, right?
Call before you dig.
Now go to Mr. Griffith.
811.
Yeah. Now go to Mr. Griffith, the chair of the O&I Subcommittee, who has been really busy lately, but you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. My colleague, Mr. Guthrie of Kentucky, mentioned this earlier, but as a part of the last reauthorization of the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration in 2020, the administration was charged with creating a pilot program to test innovative leak detection and pipeline monitoring technologies, such as sensing foams or fiber optics, to be tested under a Pipeline Safety Enhancement Program. Why has the administration not been able to stand this program up?
Well, we didn't have folks applying to it, so we sought public input on it. We got 0 comments on how we could actually stand it up. And so I think, as I read in the second panel's testimony, the process for environmental assessment, as Congress has established in the National Environmental Policy Act, could be burdensome to apply. We'd just like to know what standard you envision we review environmental factors as well as safety factors. And so beyond that, I think that would really provide the basis for standing up a successful program.
And in order to do that, we'd have to extend it, and you would be okay with that, would you not?
Extend the program?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yep. And, I mean, I believe that real-time leak detection and pipeline operation monitoring programs not only increase safety, but they also increase the public's confidence. I've had this issue in my district in pipelines because they feel like, okay, if there's going to be a problem, it's going to be a lesser problem. The pipeline company's going to come out and fix it fairly quickly. Do you agree with my assessment that it's not only good for safety, but it's also good for the public
Real-time monitoring?
feeling
Absolutely.
good?
Absolutely, yeah.
Let me ask you this. Do you believe, and I know that it's an awkward question for you, but do you believe that the lack of Senate confirmation of an administrator for the past 3 years stalled the implementation of this pilot program?
Thank you. That is an awkward question, but no, I don't believe so. We've really had a record amount of work done, and that's really the testament to the career civil servants at the agency who continue their exceptional work.
Well, I do hope we can get this program started, because I know that on one that the chairman and I've had a lot of discussion on with Mountain Valley Pipeline, if we'd had something where we could tell people that the pipeline was coming through, but we had these, whether it be the fiber optics or the foam, that we had that in place as it was being put in the ground, it would have allayed a lot of fear related to that project.
Yeah, I just met with the Fiber Optics Association, and the technologies are tremendous and overlapping amongst modes. The ability to track traffic. If you have a pipeline near a highway, they're very excited about our methane leak detection repair rule and the ability to utilize technologies to do exactly what you described.
Yeah, appreciate that. Do you believe that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission should have the authority to require safety standards in technologies, such as the ones we've just discussed, and have the authority to require that be placed when the pipelines are being put in the ground?
As much as I'd love to comment on another agency's jurisdictional area, I generally try not to do that so that others don't do that to me.
I can appreciate that. More simply then, how does your administration communicate with FERC and advise them on safety requirements for new pipeline construction?
We work very closely with the commission. In some cases, they seek our input. In some cases, we're reaching out, but we work closely with them.
Okay. But again, I'll underscore, because I think it's an important point and one that I feel passionately about. We could allay a lot of fears and make pipelines safer if we use some of these new technologies. Agree?
Completely agree, and I think you capture really the value of a lot of the work that we do on in the Office of Pipeline Safety at the agency. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Very supportive. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now go to a representative who has a lot of pipelines in her district, Ms. Fletcher, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to join all of my colleagues in saying that I, too, am really grateful for your leadership of this committee. And I am sorry to see you go, but I understand your comments from earlier. We've got a lot of work left to do this year, and I'm really glad that we are working on this together and having this hearing today. So thank you for that. And Mr. Brown, thank you so much for being here. I've enjoyed seeing you in Houston on your visits, and I'm glad to see you here today before the committee. And I think this has been a really useful hearing. As we all know, as we've discussed, PHMSA plays a key role in developing and enforcing federal safety regulations for the nation's pipelines. We've talked today about the statistics that I think most people don't know. People are always surprised when I tell them there are 2.8 million miles of paved roads and nearly 3.4 million miles of pipelines. And I do believe that Americans rely on this unseen infrastructure everywhere, to heat our homes, to fuel our cars, to power our economy, and it is the safest and most reliable form of transportation. And what you do is just so incredibly important. So I'm glad we're holding this legislative hearing today. I do agree with the comments. I have some concerns about the process, but I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to work together before the markup. I think it's very important that we assert our jurisdiction here. I previously served on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee the last time that we were working on these issues, and I think it's really important for our committee to be able to weigh in. And I know they're a little further along in their process, and I have some amendments and some things I would love to work on you with Mr. Chairman and with folks on your side of the aisle to try to make sure that our bill receives the same good reception as we try to move it forward. That said, I have some very specific questions for Deputy Administrator Brown today because these are critical issues for my constituents and, of course, for all Americans. And so I want to get right to those. PHMSA's procedures require the agency to hold a gas pipeline advisory committee meeting before issuing final rules. And the Pipes Act of 2020, which I worked on, included language that required PHMSA to hold the GPAC meeting for the long-proposed class location rule. The rulemaking would allow pipeline companies to employ modern inspection technologies, something that Mr. Griffith was just talking about, Mr. Guthrie touched on as well, and is really critically important to my constituents. And I think it's my understanding, at least, that that GPAC convened in November of last year, but was not able to finalize the rule. They discussed the rule, but weren't able to complete it. And so, can PHMSA commit to holding the GPAC meeting and finalizing the class location rule this year?
Yes, we are planning to hold that meeting at the end of March, which was the earliest available time to get the committee together.
Terrific. Thank you for that. I look forward to hearing what the result of that meeting is. One of the other pieces of legislation that I worked on in the Pipes Act of 2020 was the PHMSA Technology Pilot Program, and that's to advance the latest high-tech inspection technologies and analytics that can be used to make pipelines safer. Obviously, safety is in the name of the agency. I know that that is a priority, and the program was included in the law, but I've heard concerns over its implementation have prevented getting some of these new pilot technologies into the field. And so my question for you, well, first question is, to date, has PHMSA received any applications to conduct pipeline technology pilot projects?
We have not. And I think I'll just add too. I think some of the impetus we appreciate the work that you did on that piece of legislation. Some of the impetus is our special permit process. ISR process takes time. We're down to a queue of 0 in the special permit process. We've looked at how we can improve that to be efficient. We want to use innovative technologies. We want to just make sure that they have an equivalent level of safety and environmental performance.
Well, I appreciate that. I think one of the concerns that I've heard is, of course, that because the special permits are kind of one-time, permanent waivers, that don't expire, that's one of the challenges in pushing this through. So it seems to me like that might not be the best fit for a pilot program where you're deploying sort of experimental technology and trying to figure it out. And so if the goal here is really to get new technology into the field for a limited duration to test it, do you support Congress kind of addressing this in a way where this program could maybe pull it out of that area and the program could function as it was originally intended?
Yeah, happy to work with you on that.
That would be terrific, and I am just about out of time, so I thank you very much for being here. I look forward to continuing to work with you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Great to see you. Thanks.
I thank the gentlelady, and I'll now go to Mr. Johnson, the chair of the Environmental Subcommittee, who is retiring as well to take another job. He will be missed, and a lot of comments have been made over the last 2 months about Bill's tenure in Congress, and he's going to be missed. He's been a valuable member of this subcommittee for sure. So Mr. Johnson from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, before you start my time, let me say that I echo those same comments to you. You and I were classmates together in 2010. We've seen a lot of water go under the bridge over the last decade plus, and it's been a pleasure and an honor to work with you. And I know I'm leaving earlier than you are. Who knows? You may decide to leave earlier too. It depends on what happens. But I wish you all the best, and I've enjoyed working with you and appreciate your leadership as well. So now you can hit the clock if you want to. Hey, well, look, thanks. And before I start, Deputy Administrator, I want to express my gratitude. During the immediate aftermath of the East Palestine train derailment, in the hours and days following, my team and I had to get smart really quick on a variety of environmental, chemical, and hazardous materials issues. And I appreciate your staff, some of which I know are here, who were extremely responsive to my team, putting them in touch with subject matter experts quickly and getting us answers during an ongoing crisis to help inform our response and to hold those responsible for the derailment and cleanup to account. So I appreciate that. Also, you personally have been to the derailment site, and on behalf of my constituents, I appreciate you making that effort to be present and for listening to those affected in the community. I appreciate it. But as you know, that's not what we're here for today. I'm going to go back. I have an AP article right here from 2022 describing the Biden administration's goals for a UN climate conference. It quotes a White House official saying the administration will embark on a, quote, relentless focus to root out methane emissions to pursue their climate goals. So what does this mean in practice? Well, we examined this in my subcommittee last week. The EPA answered that call and proposed not only an onerous methane rule, one of the most expensive regulations in history, but also a new methane tax on American energy producers. And now it appears PHMSA is taking orders from John Kerry and the company as well. The Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. That's the title of your administration. Nowhere in there do I see Climate Department. By the way, and your department has now issued a new, quote, leak detection rule. So, Deputy Administrator Brown, and these, I've got a lot of questions. I'd appreciate a very concise answer. You and I both know your small agency has a huge responsibility already, and it's an important one. Does PHMSA really have the bandwidth to do its job plus implement a climate change agenda?
We have to implement the laws you pass, and the directive from the 2020 Pipes Act said that we have to oversee the minimization of methane emissions. So this was a directive to us, and it's actually, you gave us a timeline for when we had to issue this rule.
Do you have the bandwidth to do that? How can you do climate change and pipeline safety at the same time?
Well, methane...
Because that's not your job.
methane has 80 times the global warming potential as carbon dioxide, but it's also a valuable product that we use.
That doesn't matter. It's not your job. Are you concerned at all that focusing your agency on climate could risk taking PHMSA's eye off the ball and preventing future rail or pipeline catastrophes?
I think there's a confusion of minimizing methane emissions, which is what the law tells us to do. Minimizing methane emissions also reduces climate impacts. So are PHMSA's regulations then always based on risk and safety benefits, or do you propose regulations with the intent to address climate change as well? Because it sounds to me like you're morphing your agency's job description, what you're set up to do. There's no way we can just do whatever I want to do. I have to follow the law, and the law says the environment and property is part of our mission.
Well, as my colleagues have outlined today, PHMSA has been chronically slow to promulgate rules and congressional mandates for years now. It's troubling that you would use your finite resources and time on this leak detection rule that includes gathering lines and other infrastructure that aren't a pressing safety risk, especially when the issue is already being addressed and is already heavily regulated. So, Deputy Administrator, did you coordinate with the EPA to ensure that PHMSA rules like this leak detection proposal are not duplicative with their methane regulations?
We did.
Okay, great. Do you know how your rule will interact with the EPA's methane emissions reduction program, the natural gas tax? And if a pipeline operator is in compliance with PHMSA regulations, will they still have to pay the natural gas tax?
We only would enforce our regulations and EPA.
So you don't know if there's duplication there or not. They could be hit twice, both by you guys and by the EPA.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, we obviously have got a lot more questions about this and need some more clarity. I'm certainly going to urge that whoever takes over my chairmanship on the Manufacturing and Critical Materials Subcommittee, that we continue to dig into this, because the American people deserve better than this. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I look forward to working with the next chairman on that committee as well. Mr. Cardenas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan, and also Ranking Member DeGette for holding this important hearing. And I'd like to thank the Deputy Administrator Brown for being here and for your patience, Mr. Brown. I just want to say thank you to the chairman. It's been a joy working with you, and I look forward to working with you throughout the rest of this year to get some more good work done. So thank you, and I know the feeling about your announcement. With pipelines running across nearly 3.4 million miles of the United States, it's undisputable that pipeline safety is an issue that affects communities throughout our entire nation. On average, there are over 600 pipeline safety incidents a year in the United States, most of which are due to issues that are under the operator's control. This statistic tells us that not only do we need to do better to protect communities, but that we can prevent the majority of incidents with meaningful investments and intentional policy and oversight. Deputy Administrator Brown, with limited resources, how long does it currently take to assess, investigate, and respond to pipeline incidents, and how long would it take, if funded more appropriately, to actually get these responsibilities done sooner?
Thank you for that question, and it is one I think that's really valuable for the public to understand, that it can take, upwards of a year, sometimes more, to investigate the root cause of a pipeline failure, and to get that information, produce it into a report that the entire sector can benefit from in terms of identifying similar issues across the pipeline system. And so, the sooner we can get that information done, the more resources we have to do our investigations and produce that information, really the more the sector here in the United States benefits, and really the whole world, which all has a positive impact on the environment when we're able to keep the product in the pipe, as the chairman said earlier today.
And the resources you need to do your job effectively and expeditiously, is it available to your department at this time?
So we have to triage with the resources that we have, and most of my written testimony is about the vast new responsibilities that we have just in the last few years, from $100 billion in investing in new infrastructure of the future. We have a very tall task to do with the resources we have, given that we've already been stretched pretty thin.
So you could use more resources. If you did have more resources, you'd be able to be more effective and more expeditious in your.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And I want to remind the public that it's Congress that gives you those resources. You don't make them up, you don't pull them out of a bag. It's Congress that has the power of the purse. Such as committees like this would be involved in not only policy, and committees down the hall would be involved in making sure that the money is actually put where it needs to be, so you can do your job more expeditiously and more effectively for the people of the United States. I want to make sure my colleagues understand why it's so critical that we do not cut corners here. Nearly 2 years ago, there was a massive explosion at the Freeport and LNG facility in Texas that was devastating for the community surrounding that facility. Frankly, it was a miracle that no one was killed. The explosion still serves as a reminder that safety at LNG facilities is not just about the safety at the facility itself, but also about the protection of the people and the community surrounding our facilities. Recognizing this, when Congress wrote the Pipes Act of 2020, it included a requirement that PHMSA update safety standards for LNG export facilities. Administrator Brown, what is the status of this requirement?
We're in the drafting stage, and you captured it perfectly with how close that was to being a fatal incident. We want to learn the lessons from that incident and include them in that update of LNG facilities, which is long outstanding and certainly a top priority.
Okay. So it's safe to say that PHMSA was unable to meet its 3-year timeline for new standards under the law. How would additional resources to your department have helped PHMSA complete this rulemaking on time?
Well, just to for the benefit of everybody, when I arrived at the agency, we had 2 regulatory attorneys helping draft our rules, and we have 36 mandates in
Only
that.
2
Yeah.
regulatory
So
attorneys?
one of the first things we did was hire more regulatory attorneys to help us draft those rules. But yes, that's why, and I went back and reviewed the last hearing that our agency had in this committee, and the same questions and concerns existed back then. And so we thank the support of the Pipes Act to hire more individuals, and we welcome engaging on that subject as well for the next reauth.
Thank you. My time expired. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now go to the chairwoman of the full committee, Chair Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Energy and Commerce Committee has the responsibility to provide the oversight and the accountability for the funding and for the agency. PHMSA is the nation's primary regulator of pipelines, hazardous material transportation. I'm fundamentally deeply concerned that President Biden has failed to nominate an administrator for 3 years. Nobody has been nominated even. So when you talk about giving more money to an agency that doesn't even have an administrator at the top, it seems like, to me, we have to start there. So, Mr. Brown, do you agree that PHMSA would benefit from a Senate-confirmed leader to manage the agency?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And, and without the leadership, then, there's over 500 employees at PHMSA. You just mentioned you have 2 regulatory attorneys.
We have a few more now, but we started off with 2 when I got there.
So there's several incomplete mandates from the Pipes Act of 2020. You just mentioned 36 maybe. Prior pipeline safety authorizations that have not yet been completed. Meanwhile, PHMSA is proposing unrelated regulations that appear to exceed your statutory authority granted to you by Congress and distract from the safety mission. So why should Congress give PHMSA new mandates when it hasn't completed the existing work?
Historically, when I just comparatively, in 2016 during our reauth, we had 19 mandates, and in 2020 we had 36. Many of those were some of the outstanding ones from 2016. We welcome, we always want to be doing more. There's so much work to do. Really, we welcome them, and we're most of the way done with our mandates. But we do have to triage our resources. We do oversee, and most of my testimony was about, and really, as I noted, you highlighted how much more infrastructure we have and how much more energy we're moving in the United States. We're the ones who have to oversee it and ensure the safe transportation. Congressman.
Okay, reclaiming my time. My question is, why are you focusing on regulations that exceed your statutory authority before you complete the mandates that have been put into the law?
So I think the question is related to the methane leak detection repair rule. That was a directive. We were directed to do that rulemaking in the 2020 Pipes Act, signed into law by President Trump.
What? You exceeded, my understanding is that the authority that was granted to you in the law has been exceeded by the agency. That is of concern to me as a chairman of this committee. That is to be ensuring that agencies are fulfilling the statutory authority granted to them by the elected representatives of the people, not making up your own decisions as to what authority you have. And I know we have courts that also get into that. So, Mr. Brown, PHMSA exceeded its statutory authority in the proposed leak detection regulation. That's the one you were just mentioning, by failing to propose risk-based safety measures. It does not appear that PHMSA gathered feedback from the public and pipeline operators prior to proposing the rule, because it is riddled with technical and legal flaws. Now it is likely to be challenged and overturned, which will delay important safety regulations even further. So yes or no, do you agree that PHMSA regulations should be risk-based and cost-effective?
Yes, and we believe they are.
Yes or no, is it true that PHMSA's leak detection rule expands PHMSA's jurisdiction to include gathering lines and justifies it based on climate change benefits?
As well as safety benefits.
Thank you. Was climate change in the law?
It was a part of a 2,000-page law, and it directed us to minimize methane emissions, which has an 80 times the global warming potential as carbon dioxide. So minimizing methane emissions does mitigate climate change.
Was it in the law?
Yes, that was in the law.
Climate change?
Minimizing methane emissions.
That you justify based upon climate change?
There may be a dispute on whether minimizing methane emissions has the impact of impacting climate change. We
Okay.
believe the science says it does. I think there's a consensus.
Well, just reclaiming my time. When you're justifying when you're adding a requirement that justifies based upon climate change benefits, I believe that is beyond what the legislation proposed. So yes or no, Congress intended for PHMSA rules to be cost-effective, meaning that compliance costs are justified in improved safety for the American people. Should the American people pay more for energy to offset regulatory costs that do not have a safety benefit?
That do not have a safety benefit?
Yes.
I'd really have to understand what we're talking about here. I'm not sure I'm aware of any.
Does climate change have a safety benefit?
Absolutely. The endangerment finding that I think is upheld since the Bush administration specifically calls out the public health and welfare benefits of mitigating climate change.
To consumers?
I mean, I think if you look at hurricanes and the actual cost, or if you ask insurance companies, ask the private sector, do they think there are safety and health risks from global climate change? The marketplace says yes.
But the safety of the pipelines, does it impact the safety of the pipelines?
Absolutely, and in fact, we have a regulation.
Okay,
that
yet to
requires
be
it.
determined. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Petroleum, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Brown, I want to get to the authorization levels and then to the methane, so I'm going to try to, do both here. The Republican discussion draft makes deep cuts to PHMSA's authorization levels. Just over 3 years ago, when we passed the Bipartisan Pipes Act of 2020, Republicans and Democrats from both chambers came together to reauthorize PHMSA's pipeline safety activities at a level of $238 million by fiscal year 2023, and the bill in front of us today would enact an unreasonable reduction to that number, cutting PHMSA's pipeline safety activities by $42 million, or nearly 20%. Now, I disagree with Chairman Duncan's analysis of these numbers, so let me repeat. The bipartisan authorization that Congress passed in 2020 included $238 million authorization for PHMSA's pipeline safety activities across 6 different activities in fiscal year 2023. The current draft bill before us authorizes $196 million across 4 different activities. And any way you want to look at it, that's a $42 million annual cut. So my questions is, there's been a lot of talk about how PHMSA is still working on required rulemaking from the 2016 and 2020 authorizations. Would the $42 million annual cut included in this bill harm PHMSA's ability to finalize those required rulemakings?
Yes, sir.
All right. And I mean, I think it's clear that Republicans, that their bill would actually make pipelines across the nation more dangerous. I don't know how they're going to get around that. But I also wanted to turn to PHMSA's methane leak detection rule, which it proposed last May. The rule was in direct response to requirements that Congress passed 3 years ago in the Pipes Act of 2020, mandating that PHMSA require pipeline operators to create and conduct methane leak detection and repair programs to protect both safety and the environment. And I strongly support PHMSA's proposed rule, which would make pipelines safer, our environment cleaner, and would generate over $2 billion in annual benefits. So my question here, Mr. Brown, can you talk about the benefits that would result from the rule and how it would both enhance safety and protect the environment?
Yeah, and thanks for offering the chance to clear up. The rule was a directive from Congress, signed into law by President Trump. It actually directed us as well to include environmental benefits in our cost-benefit analysis. So we're following the law as directed by this committee and the Congress that enacted that law. But many of the benefits is really harnessing American ingenuity. We in America are the global leaders, and I look at many of the members from Texas and from so many different states, New Jersey, that are developing technologies to identify methane emissions and then capture them, mitigate them, keep the product in the pipe, which is really the goal that I hear from, I think the chairman's mentioned it, but also from the private sector. So what we're trying to do is effectuate the directive that we were given, but really it's to be the global leaders in harnessing the technology to keep product in the pipe, which ultimately allows us to use that product more efficiently and safely.
Well, I appreciate that. And let me just add, many of us, both Democrats and Republicans on the committee, went to the climate conference in Dubai a couple months ago. And I was very proud of the fact that we were able to say that we were out front on trying to deal with methane, not only with what you've done, but also what the EPA has done. And, Senator Kerry talked about all of this and was able to get, other countries, both this time as well as the previous time, to enact a methane reduction program. And of course, we did that also in the Inflation Reduction Act. So when you talk about our global leadership, this is one of the key areas where the United States has exercised global leadership and convinced other countries to come along. So, I look at it not only from a safety point of view, which is the focus of today, but also from an environmental point of view and trying to reduce the negative impacts of climate change. And also, in my district, we have a lot of the refineries, and they see the methane flames. So it's very easy for me. A lot of times with this committee, when I talk about what we're doing in a positive way to help people, it's hard to explain at home, but this is very easy to explain at home. So thank you very much. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from that state up north, Mr. Wahlberg, for 5 minutes.
Go blue.
Go blue.
Go Lions. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Brown, for being here as well. I don't think it's really debatable that pipelines are the safest, cleanest way to transport energy resources across the U.S. and internationally. Certainly is in Michigan, and Line 5 in Michigan transports both the liquids for the jet fuel that got me to the warm climes of D.C. from Michigan on Tuesday, and the propane that heats nearly 400,000 households across our state, especially up north and in the UP, especially during these cold weeks like this one. Safety of these vital assets is our #1 priority, which is why I'm grateful that we're discussing this legislation, the Chair's Pipeline Safety Modernization Expansion Act. In December, Line 5 finally received, after 4 years, a permit from the Michigan Public Service Commission to move forward with the Great Lakes Tunnel project, which would inarguably make that pipeline make it almost impossible for a spill to take place in our Great Lakes resources. And yet, there's still other things that have to be done. There are great changes that should be made, and yet this process took 4 years, and they still have more to go. Mr. Brown, I understand that you have no bearing over our state processes or what happens next with the Army Corps. But I think this is indicative of our entire permitting process, and it's why the legislation includes expanded authority for FERC to step in to authorize federal permits for changes to an existing pipeline if another state or federal agency fails to do so within a year. That would have helped with Line 5. How should an administration better address permitting delays for projects that modernize and improve safety for existing pipelines? And let me add as well, if safety is a true goal, why do these updates take so long to approve?
So our agency does not have any jurisdiction over the permitting process. I'll just say when we have safer outcomes, when we have better environmental performance, I think that helps get to the underlying issues that you sometimes have with permitting. So the better we're able to do our job, I presume that will have some benefit, particularly since states do have a great deal of permitting authority.
Yeah, well, this legislation would help out and would give opportunity for the feds with consults from you.
I can't comment on the sort of permitting process in the legislation just because it's outside of our jurisdiction. Certainly, we welcome the commentary today about the resources that it takes for us to do our jobs, and we welcome engaging on that topic.
Well, moving on, violence and protesting of pipelines has increased significantly, with many of these disruptions lauded as justified by the mainstream media in the fight against climate change. But we've seen the data that shows how much safer and environmentally friendly pipelines are compared to other modes of transportation, which many go through our communities and are challenging. We are always going to need fossil fuels. Even on an EV, they're used to make many of its plastic components. So we're always going to need pipelines. Mr. Brown, does PHMSA consider acts to damage or destroy an interstate natural gas or hazardous liquids pipeline facility an appropriate form of protest against climate change?
No, we do not support violence. When we find it, we refer, or any threats, we refer to the Transportation Security Administration.
What's PHMSA doing to increase security of pipelines and the safety of their surrounding communities amidst rising violence?
The Transportation Security Administration has a primary jurisdiction over security, but our inspectors have a good working relationship with the TSA, and so when we identify any risks, we report them to the TSA, and we actually train the TSA officials in the work that we do, so they have a better understanding as well.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Hampshire, Mrs. Custer, for 5 minutes. Sorry about that.
No worries at all.
It's on your tag. I should read.
We do actually have a very big day coming up on Tuesday, so everyone will know about New Hampshire. Thank you for hosting this hearing, Chairman Duncan and Ranking Member DeGette, and thank you for being here, Deputy Administrator Brown. I'm very excited to welcome a former Granite Stater to our committee. Before I get into questions, I want to take a moment to step back. While pipeline safety is an important area from congressional oversight, I believe we must have a more holistic conversation about the reliability of our natural gas system. In the last 11 years, there have been 5 major unplanned gas generation outages, including Winter Storm Elliott, in December of 2022, Winter Storm Uri in February 2021, and they have taken hundreds of lives and cost billions of dollars in damages. This illustrates that safety and reliability do go hand in hand. Despite being the backbone of our energy system, there is currently no singular reliability regulator to oversee the natural gas system. Take a quick look at our natural gas system and you'll see upstream, producers are regulated by a hodgepodge of state-level entities like the Texas Railroad Commission or the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Midstream, natural gas transmission is regulated by PHMSA, Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. Downstream in our gas system, generators are regulated by FERC, and local distribution companies are regulated by PHMSA and state utility commissions. This alphabet soup of state and federal level regulators means there's no one entity responsible for thinking about the reliability of the entire natural gas system. I believe the October 2023 FERC staff report lays out some thoughtful ideas about the value of having a system-wide reliability regulator for the natural gas system, and I hope my colleagues are willing to work with me to help ensure the reliability of this critical energy source. Turning to this legislation, one issue I see with the majority's draft pipeline safety reauthorization bill is that it does not eliminate the non-application clause of 60104B. This language prohibits PHMSA from applying new design, installation, construction, or testing standards to existing pipelines, and this can have dire consequences, as we know. 2018, a series of fires and explosions destroyed 131 homes, injured 22 people, and killed 1 person in Lawrence, Massachusetts, just neighboring my district, home to our colleague Lori Trahan. The cause, faulty construction procedures, leaving the system without appropriate pressure regulation, led to overpressurization on the gas system. In response to the tragedy, Congress gave PHMSA the authority to prevent overpressurization, but if there's a new development in valves that could save lives, like rupture mitigation valves, PHMSA is prohibited from requiring those safety measures be added to older pipelines. Deputy Administrator Brown, how does 60104B impact PHMSA's ability to ensure that the existing pipeline system reflects the most up-to-date safety standards?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. The National Transportation Safety Board had recommended that we apply our automatic and remote shutoff valve rule to existing pipelines. However, because of the statute, we are unable to do that. The bulk of the application of that rule would apply to the existing infrastructure, but we were unable to do that. So it does apply to completely replaced pipe and new pipe, but unfortunately not to existing pipelines.
Thank you, and I think your answer illustrates our need to take a hard look at reforming this section. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman, and I'll add my comments to the departure of you and Mr. Duncan. You will be missed. I want to talk with you a little bit about.
That sounded heartfelt. Thank you very much.
Well, you're not a Michigan fan, so. Back to the issue at hand. It seems to me that some of my colleagues across the aisle are raising concerns about using pipes for sequestering CO2. And I know they have grave concerns about the impact of carbon dioxide on influencing climate change. One of the safest ways to sequester CO2 is through pipelines. I was in Norway back in August, visited one of the largest natural gas production facilities in the world, and about an hour away is their one of the most modern facilities in the world for sequestering carbon dioxide. So what are the concerns of your agency about sequestering CO2 and using pipelines for doing that?
Well, thank you, Congressman. There was a good track record of moving carbon dioxide via pipeline until 2020. A tragic incident in your neighboring state in Satarsha, Mississippi, and really we saw a lot of things go wrong. We had
That's the only one.
correct. That's the only major incident.
Yeah.
But it did impact an entire community, and we were lucky that there were no fatalities. And so we're working, really with stakeholders across the spectrum to mitigate the risk from the areas we saw that could be improved.
I really think the concern is not so much about the transport of CO2 via pipeline as much as it is about the complete elimination of hydrocarbon fuels. If you don't need to do CO2 mitigation or sequestration if you're not producing natural gas or other hydrocarbon products. And I think we've seen this, and I wonder sometimes how much non-government organizations influence your policymaking. It certainly did in Europe. Russian-backed NGOs convinced Europe that fracking was bad and made them more and more reliant on Russian gas, which I found interesting. And then when you start talking about pipelines, in the very first week of President Biden's administration, he shuts down Keystone XL, but approves Nord Stream 2, gives green light to that, and also pulled out of an agreement on the East Mediterranean pipeline. So I'm not sure that it is all that much about safety and issues as it is just part of the climate agenda that imposed extraordinary difficulties on people in Europe. I don't know if you saw the report from The Economist last year that 68,000 people died during the last winter in Europe, which was a relatively mild winter because they could no longer afford their household utility costs. They didn't freeze to death. These are people who had complications such as respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular. We're going to see the same thing here if we continue down this path of trying to basically terminate any use of natural gas, which the hearing last week and some of the discussion today leads me to conclude that's where this is heading. Going back to the responsibility of your agency, your agency should really be neutral on natural gas or oil or anything else that's transported by pipelines. You should be making sure that it's transported safely and that we have an adequate infrastructure.
We are neutral, and we just try to be ahead of the market and mitigate risk.
Well, my big concern here is how this impacts people. And I know there are instances where there are accidents with natural gas, there are accidents with everything. There are accidents falling into a bathtub, but we're not banning bathtubs. So I appreciate your focus on making sure that we have the infrastructure we need and that the infrastructure is maintained in a way that we can rely on it and know that these fuels are being transported safely. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I think, gentlemen, the chair now Dr. Shard, are you ready? Okay. You're recognized, even though you're from Washington.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for half of that. And thank you, Mr. Brown, for being here today to testify. I wanted to start by expressing how important pipeline safety is in my home state of Washington. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the Olympic pipeline explosion in Bellingham, Washington, less than an hour outside my current district, and it killed 3 young people and devastated the local ecosystem. And many of the safety protections and considerations currently in place stem from this tragedy. And that's why it's so incredibly important to me that we do nothing to reduce current safety standards and the capacity of PHMSA through policy changes or funding authorization levels. Mr. Brown, my colleague, Representative Tonko, already discussed some of this, but I'm also concerned by the bill's inclusion of an 18% cut to currently authorized levels. Grants awarded to PHMSA have been key in improving Washington State's pipeline safety, particularly the state damage prevention and state one-call grants that improve the mitigation of excavation damages in the state. Could you please speak on how important grant programs like these are for states in maintaining pipeline safety?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for acknowledging that incident. I had the pleasure of meeting the victims' parents, one of the victims' parents in Washington State, and they really inspire the work that we do at the agency. We've got a display of the last communication from Liam Wood to his family at that tragic incident. But the largest source of damages to pipeline infrastructure are excavation damages. The one-call programs provide funding for states to address those that major risk. We still have a big challenge when it comes to addressing those issues. Folks don't know what's below, and so you got to call before you dig. Call 811. And that those programs at a state level help ensure that that does occur. There are requirements to do it in states. You are required to call before you dig, so that you do not injure or, in some cases, kill yourself when you're digging.
And we have those requirements even for our own homes in Washington State. So I wanted to also just mention that I'm sure that a cut of this magnitude will also affect PHMSA's ability to meet additional demands to regulate new types of pipelines. My colleague was just talking about pipelines in Norway, which I also visited, that carry CO2 from one of the most polluting industries, cement manufacturing, and get them so deep into the bedrock under the ocean that they can be considered captured. So these new pipelines can carry more than just natural gas, like carbon dioxide and hydrogen fuel. And I was wondering if you could talk about how the staffing, administrative processes, any additional needs that PHMSA will need to fulfill as these new types of pipelines, but possibly with different safety requirements and needs for construction with that kind of pressure, will become more prevalent. How will these cuts affect the ability to move forward with those?
Really important question. We've had decades of time working with and working through challenges related to responding to an oil and gas incident. But our first responders, a handful have experienced a carbon dioxide incident and responding to that. And in fact, we know from Satarshman, I know from talking to the fire chief down there, that they didn't know what they were encountering or how to respond to it. And so we have requirements related to emergency preparedness, to review emergency response plans, and we have to help develop and support our first responders, the heroes that are running towards the fire and running towards the disasters and emergencies, to make sure they're prepared. And then we got to make sure we do everything to prevent the incidents from occurring in the first place. And for that, we're going to need to build out a bigger team to accommodate the upwards of potentially $100 billion in both hydrogen and carbon dioxide infrastructure, for which we have some experience over the decades. But if there's a big build out, we want to make sure we are the world leader in those technologies.
Sounds like we may need more funding, not less.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and I apologize for not getting your name right. There was no R. I looked for the R over here, and R not there in your name. So anyway, I can get there. The chair recognizes you, Lake Marizoni.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, as has been discussed briefly, the Pipeline Hazardous Materials and Safety Administration is required by law since 2020 to hold a gas pipeline advisory committee meeting on the class location rule. My first question is, have you been directed by the Biden administration to delay or not to convene the advisory committee?
No, ma'am.
My next question is, why haven't you convened the advisory committee to address class location?
Really, to because we were triaging the numerous mandates from the 2020 Pipes Act. But we did schedule a meeting, and that meeting went 5 full days, actually more than 5 full days, because we went past each day. So we've rescheduled that. We've continued that work into March, and it is scheduled for March.
Thank you. Would the agency also concur that completion of the rule would benefit the environment, as it would eliminate up to 800 million cubic feet of natural gas releases annually due to a class change pipe replacements?
I believe the proposal has identified those benefits. I can't speak out of turn before the committee reviews that rule and before we draft a final version of it, but there are benefits identified in the proposal.
Thank you. What assurances can you provide the committee that PHMSA is prioritizing completion of this rule?
Well, we scheduled the meeting along with another priority rulemaking, so I think that gives indication. But Congress directed us to do it, so we're doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Earlier this year, I introduced a bill entitled Hands Off Our Home Appliances Act. My bill would prevent the Biden administration from enacting harmful regulations on a variety of gas appliances. These regulations would raise costs for Americans and stifle their access to the energy that best fits their needs. In May of this year, PHMSA announced a new leak detection and repair rulemaking, which will impose additional burdensome regulations on the natural gas industry. How can you ensure that this round of regulations isn't an attempt to limit Americans' access to natural gas?
Well, there was actually a lot of consensus around the provisions in this proposed rule from industry and environmental stakeholders, safety stakeholders in our initial public meeting. So I think there's definitely some debate on some provisions in this rule, and so we'll continue that debate. But I hope that provides some assurance that this was a directive from legislation signed into law by President Trump that we are carrying out. There's a lot of consensus around the rule, and then there's questions about provisions, but that is part of the rulemaking process. We welcome your feedback. I've certainly heard the feedback today that there's a lot of interest both sides of the aisle in this rulemaking, and so we will try to develop the rule that comports with Congress's directive and mitigating safety and environmental risk, which I believe everybody in the room is focused on.
Well, thank you, and I hope that there is some consensus, you said, but obviously there's, in other areas, not consensus, and I hope your administration and your department does not target natural gas, as I believe the current administration is doing, and I'll yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Vesey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And with over 3 million miles of oil and gas pipelines stretching across the country, we have to make sure that PHMSA is obviously adequately resourced. And we know that your authority lapsed last September, and it's January, and we're just not having a hearing. And I understand that pipelines are currently the safest and most economical means of delivering energy and other hazardous materials. And as a matter of fact, I was very happy to help lead the inclusion of the SCALE Act and the Infrastructure Investments and Job Act last Congress. The bill established programs within DOE to develop infrastructure for carbon dioxide capture, transport, utilization, and storage. But we can never forget the safety of these systems as well. Today, we're here to talk about reauthorizing PHMSA, whose sole mission is safety. And indeed, Congress created PHMSA and immediately dedicated to the assignment and maintenance of safety as the highest priority, just as we do anything else. And we have to prioritize further increases in these safety systems because, as we saw in my hometown of Fort Worth, we just had an explosion at the Sandman Hotel in downtown where 21 people were injured and 1 critically. And so I wanted to ask you, in September, PHMSA proposed a rule to require operators of gas distribution pipelines to update their distribution integrity management programs, energy response plans, operations and maintenance manuals, and other safety practices. These proposals attempt to implement provisions of the last pipeline reauthorization from 2020. Can you provide an update on PHMSA gas distribution rulemaking?
Yeah, we're racing to get that one done. We hope to, there's been a lot of questions about holding our committee meetings. We hope to get that one on the next meeting after our upcoming meeting so that we can finalize it as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, in your opinion, will rulemaking like this help prevent incidents like we saw at the Sandman Hotel? Because that was a terrible blast. Quite frankly, we're lucky that the injuries weren't more serious, but it's not anything that we should take for granted.
Yes, and we've been a part of that investigation at the hotel there. So far, it appears it did not result as part of the jurisdiction that we regulate. But to your point, our rule aims to address incidents like that, and we'll find out what the root cause was and be able to make a final determination.
Why do you think it's taken so long to implement congressional mandates from 2020?
Really personnel. We can only do, this is a reoccurring challenge that in this committee, as I went to look at the testimony from 2019, when we have dozens of mandates, we can only do as much as our, the amount of personnel we have working on them, and we're very lean. So what you get in is a little bit about what you get out in the time that you give us.
Yeah. It's interesting going back to the Sandman Hotel because my wife and I had just eaten at the restaurant there a couple of weeks prior. On the bottom floor of the restaurant, on the bottom floor of the hotel, and then obviously the hotel is there. It's a very historic building as well, and I think that people have a reasonable expectation that these sort of structures are safe and that they won't explode. What else do you think that we need to do in Congress to make sure that nothing like that what just happened in Fort Worth ever happens again in any of our major cities across our state or the country, for that matter?
Yeah, I think it really helps for people to understand that we are, most of my testimony is about how much we are charged with doing with a very bare bones staff, and so the better understanding that these incidents can occur if you don't have proper oversight. There's a lot of discussion about how safe pipelines are. All I hear about are how unsafe they are, because I get the calls in the middle of the night when tragedies happen, and that's the job. And so while we're proud of having the safest system in the world, it's not safe if you're at a restaurant and it explodes, right? It's not safe if there's a pipeline in your backyard, it explodes, and you're a victim of that. So, those do happen. We're working towards zero incidents, and we're far from it. And I think we need, obviously, the directives from you all and the resources from you all to get to zero incidents and to acknowledge that we are far from zero.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I know that NTSB has been on site, and I want to know, do we have your commitment to work together to implement sound pipeline safety recommendations that the board may put forward so nothing like this will happen again?
100%. We work hand in hand with the NTSB, and we're grateful for their leadership.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Congressman.
I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding back. Chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Brown, for being here. I want to go through a couple things, actually. According to PHMSA, I think Texas has about, let me get the exact amount up. It is about, it's over 400, almost 500,000 miles of pipeline. The country has, I think, like 2.5 million, so we're over 1/4 of the pipelines in the country. And of course, as you know, we're regulated by the Texas Railroad Commission. And after Winter Storm Uri, I want to get this on the record, some people were calling me and telling me that ERCOT dropped the ball and that we should be regulated by a federal agency. And I said, not on your life, because that was a perfect storm. There's already too many regulators, too many irons in that fire. And so we don't, in Texas, we don't take county to the fact that somehow the federal government needs to regulate what we do to take care of our own citizens. That's my aside there for just a minute. But anyway, thank you for being here. And thank you for committing, by the way, to Representative Lizzie Fletcher, my colleague. The chair, I think, kind of alluded that she had a lot of pipelines in her system. I think actually she has most of the offices and the buildings and the companies. I'm the Gulf Coast of Texas, where we have a whole lot of pipelines in that district. So we're glad that you committed you will hold GPAC meetings this year on the class location rule. We appreciate that commitment. And I'm just curious, how come none was held past year?
Really to try, for efficiency's sake, these are multi-day meetings, and when we convene and we know we've got to get all these folks in place, and it takes months to schedule the meeting, we're trying to do as much work as we can in one meeting rather than trying to schedule multiple meetings. That's really,
Well, you can do that if you'll make it a destination meeting. We come down to Galveston and spend lots of money. That's what we'd like to see you do.
Can we take that as a directive?
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman?
As long as you're spending lots of money, come to Texas. Well, yes or no, do you agree that on the class location rule, that this rule would improve safety and prevent disruptions to communities by utilizing modern safety practices? Yes or no?
I unfortunately just can't get ahead of the rule until we have the committee meeting and finalized, but I can acknowledge that it is, those benefits are identified in the proposal.
But you have some gut feeling about it? Maybe it could? Yes or no?
We've identified those benefits in the proposal, so
So you're saying yes?
I am saying we have said yes previously.
No pressure, but we're going to make your stay in Galveston more expensive if you don't fess up.
Just following the rules of rulemakings and ex parte rules.
All good. Do you agree that the completion of this rule would also benefit the environment, eliminating up to 800 million cubic feet of natural gas that is released annually due to class change pipe replacements?
I can't speak to the specific numbers, but I can acknowledge that if we keep product from being emitted, that is a good environmental benefit, and this rule has identified that as a potential benefit.
Is there someone in your organization that keeps up? Because I served 4 years in the Texas House of Representatives, and I was on the Environmental Reg Committee my first term. There was a lot of gas releases back in the day. Is there somebody in your organization that actually keeps up with us improving on that?
With our new proposed rule, we will be keeping up on it. We only require reporting for 3 million cubic emissions of 3 million cubic feet. And that's a pretty high threshold. So,
right.
But we get references from all kinds of individuals, especially reporters, saying, "Hey, did you see this? We're tracking this large emission." Then we go investigate that. So right now, it's a bit of an ad hoc approach until we get new standards in place.
Well, I also want to jump over, we have concerns about the gas transmission safety rule that governs testing and record keeping of certain pipelines. Now, I've already said Texas has about a fourth of those in the country, and of course, the Keystone Pipeline would have come into my district. The rule, transmission safety rule, would require operators to needlessly retest roughly 50,000 miles of older, previously tested pipelines that are deemed safe, but for whatever reason, they don't have records going back to post 1970 records. Is that going to be a problem?
Well, you identified the problem, and I think we do not want needless testing. We want productive work being done to maintain the system. We're setting up a committee to try to get some a consensus approach on that.
Have you ever toured a facility where they're operated primarily by computer and a lot of stuff? What facility have you toured?
Actually, in Texas, Enterprise.
Good facility.
I'd say a dozen or more facilities. Yeah.
Yeah, good to hear. Well, my time has expired, so I guess I will end it here, and I guess it is time. Thank you for being here. Did Ms. Castor show up? Ms. Castor did. She does have an R in her name, so I recognize the gentlelady, Ms. Castor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Administrator Brown, thank you very much for being here today. The mission of the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration is very important. You protect our neighbors back home and our communities. Your agency has a critical mission on health, safety, and environmental well-being, including regulation of the expansive network of about 3.4 million miles of natural gas pipeline systems across the United States. I understand this is an immensely challenging job for a historically underfunded agency, given the inherent dangers of sending gas, a highly flammable and toxic substance, through aging pipelines into our homes and businesses. Since 2010, there have been over 3,000 significant gas leak accidents, 390 of which resulted in explosion. These gas pipeline explosions have injured 725 people and killed 163 people. But your agency also plays a very important role in protecting the environmental well-being and considering the environmental impacts of gas pipelines, because gas pipelines leak methane pollution into the atmosphere, and that increases the cost and the impacts of the climate crisis, which are really weighing down our neighbors back home as well. So in addition to the cost of the climate crisis, methane pollution can degrade local indoor and outdoor air quality, and it poses a severe threat to the public health. So notably, in the Pipes Act of 2020, Congress made it clear the intent for your agency to consider the environmental and climate cost and impacts and incorporate those considerations into the agency's cost-benefit analysis for safety standards. So can you outline how your agency evaluates the environmental costs, impacts in its decision-making, and how would the majority's draft bill before us today impact your ability to consider those costs and benefits and safety standards?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the question. And just to reiterate, we were directed to include the environmental benefits in our rulemakings in the 2020 Pipes Act. And so we followed that. It sounds like there's some concern that we followed the directive from Congress, but obviously we don't get to choose what directives we get to follow from Congress. We have to follow them all. So how we go about doing it, there's been an interagency process to estimate the social cost of methane, for example. Certainly when we have incidents that impact people or the environment, we use the examples that have occurred in the past. We're somewhat restricted to the data that we have available or estimates of environmental impacts. And so it can be quite challenging. We hired for the first time an environmental economist who's an expert in that, again, to carry out the directives that you gave us. And I know there's concern that we're moving, we hired one environmental economist. That's not a major shift in our, 600-person agency, but it is a shift to adhere to the congressional directive of trying to estimate the benefits and the cost. It's not a science, but we really do get a lot of input when we propose our estimated costs from the public.
And then in addition to the environmental costs and benefits of what you're doing, do you also consider the environmental health of our communities when you're updating standards?
Absolutely.
And how do you do that?
From avoided incidents is a big part of it when it comes to pipelines. But also from leaks or certainly their safety and the environmental impacts when it comes to public health can be inextricably linked. Maybe if we're talking about a CO2 emissions, that's prolonged exposure to a leak could cause a problem. Similar for other refined products if there were volatile organic compounds in the air, that sort of thing.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll yield back my time, but first say that this agency has a very important mission. They've been underfunded, and I really hope that the committee will ensure that they have the staff and resources that they need. Right now they're facing an 18% budget cut, and I think that puts our communities and our neighbors at risk and should not be adopted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Pence.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member DeGette, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witness today for being here. Having spent my career distributing petroleum products across the country, I'm keenly aware of how safe, reliable, and affordable pipelines are for our nation, having also been a petroleum trucker all my life as well. I've often said in this committee that fossil fuels are the lifeblood of our economy, fueling the transportation industry, keeping the lights on, heating homes, and cooking meals and are an irreplaceable resource for the manufacturing that's so important to the Indiana 6th District. As we look into the future of our energy outlook, what our energy outlook will be, our nation will need more pipelines, not less, particularly as technology moves to different types of fuels. As a federal safety regulator of pipelines across our country, PHMSA should act as a contributing partner to the energy industry as they build out the necessary infrastructure to meet the demands of tomorrow. Unfortunately, the Biden administration has continued down an anti-fossil fuel path that is putting our nation's energy industry on the brink of failure and stunting the growth of key energy innovations. Deputy Administrator Brown, in Indiana's 6th District and across state, Hoosiers are leading the world in next-generation hydrogen applications. The hydrogen hub up by Gary, Indiana, Whiting Refinery. As R&D continues to advance, it is important that the federal government avoid over-regulating technologies that we're still learning about. However, this leak detection rule puts the cart before the horse and regulates an industry that is not yet ready for widespread commercialization. It's important for your agency to carefully consider the experts involved in this industry on how to allow continued innovation and foster this new technology. Here's my question. Has your agency collaborated with your Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee to develop industry-led standards for pure hydrogen or hydrogen blend pipelines?
We do contribute to voluntary standard discussions. We don't want to direct voluntary standards of industry. That is industry's role. So we do collaborate, and I think on this rule, I think we've got some good input and actually held multiple public forums with industry's input on how to invest our research dollars to address hydrogen risks and opportunities, as well as to detect leaks to make sure they're safe and can move the product of the future.
Well, sure. So, but we have to have new pipelines to move hydrogen. Do you agree with that?
That we anticipate that is the case. Yes.
And do you like hydrogen as an alternative over other carbon-based liquids?
Our agency is neutral. We just want to try to anticipate what the market's going to do and then be ready for it from mitigating safety and environmental risks.
So I would just kind of encourage you that, anticipating where we're going, if the refiners, the oil companies, if they would like to move to a cleaner fuel like hydrogen, and a lot of, I have Cummins Engine Company in my hometown, they'd like to move to that for heavy-duty on-road and off-road as well, then we have to think ahead on upgrading existing or putting in new pipelines to move that product.
Completely agree, and we actually are working with just about every sector of the economy on anticipating a hydrogen build-out. There's $100 billion in the two Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act to develop the hydrogen economy.
Okay, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Brown, thank you for being here. Last year, PHMSA proposed a rule to reduce methane emissions from pipelines by altering standards for leak detection programs, mandatory repair timelines, survey and patrol requirements, and more. I'm concerned, and by the way, you'll find consistent on both sides of the aisle here, willingness and desire to reduce methane emissions, but I'm concerned that PHMSA's proposed rule goes well beyond congressional mandate included in the Pipes Act of 2020. And additionally, I'm concerned that the rule's preamble is misleading and incorrectly uses data and methodology to assert that current emissions are underestimated. It is very important that PHMSA use complete data. In Section 113 of the Pipes Act, Congress made it clear that not all leaks were hazardous, and therefore not all leaks needed repair. However, PHMSA's definitions contained in the proposed rule expand regulatory authority that will require operators to detect and repair all leaks, regardless of the threat posed. And not only is this a direct violation of our congressional intent, but I also worry that it will force operators to deprioritize the actual real safety issues that you guys are charged with. Supreme Court has upheld this. West Virginia versus the EPA, we're going through it right now in the Chevron deference case. And so this is the check on the executive branch. I want to know from you, how will subsequent rulemakings related to the Pipes Act be updated to align with congressional intent?
Well, and this may help clear things up. Two items that may help clear things up. One, we're at the midpoint of considering that rule, and we're getting the feedback, such as you just described, from our advisory committee. The other thing is, when the 2020 Pipes Act was enacted, we didn't regulate gas gathering lines. We had been told by Congress, hey, you might look at these. These have been unregulated. We had hundreds of thousands of miles of completely unregulated lines at the federal level. And in 2021, after a directive to start regulating them, we started regulating
Who was the directive from in 2021?
Congress.
And can you tell me why PHMSA is that why PHMSA is requiring operators to detect and repair the leaks?
Yes.
Okay.
To meet the congressional mandates, correct.
When you look at, I think that you would agree that operators should focus on repairs that will have a safety impact. Is that true?
Safety and environmental impact, yes.
Okay. Section 113 of the Act requires operators of regulated non-rural gas gathering lines, new and existing gas transmission facilities, and new and existing distribution pipeline facilities to conduct leak detection and repair programs that meet the need for gas pipeline safety. And in the requirements for leak detection and repair programs, I think we were pretty explicitly clear that the mandate says that leak detection programs should focus on the ability to identify and locate and categorize all leaks as either hazardous, as a potential to become explosive, and then otherwise hazardous. So can you talk to me about the proposed rule as you are now gathering information like you just testified? And will the proposed rule include the ability for the producers, for the transmission lines, for the operators to do their job and have the ability to prioritize?
Yeah, we direct producers and operators to classify the type of leak. So if it's immediate safety risk, like a potential explosion at any moment, then you've got to do that ASAP. Hours. If it is it could be a potential safety risk in the near future. All right, we give you an allotted amount of time, weeks. If it is beyond that, then you have more time to address the leak. So we do precisely what you described.
Talk to me about the evolution of the rule since it was first proposed and where you are now, and the dialing up or the aggressiveness of PHMSA as a repair agency versus a safety agency.
We haven't changed the mission beyond what Congress in the 2020 Pipes Act told us to do. So I think that's the part that I think seems to be confusion about. When we're told to minimize methane emissions, we can't ignore that directive. And so while we talk about that having climate benefits, I thought everybody in the room was under the impression that minimizing methane emissions does have climate benefits. But the evolution is simply that when we had it out for public comment, we extended the public comment period to make sure we got everybody's comments. I believe we got tens of thousands, 50,000 comments. Then we had to go through each one of those and identify the substantive comments and work through that to then provide it to the statutory committee, which we are halfway through for their review of the section by section of that rule. So there's still much more process to go to address some of the issues or potential concerns that you identified. And ultimately, we've got to have a rule that is within line with what we've been directed to do.
My time has expired. Have you visited the Permian Basin?
No, and would be glad to go. My family's from Texas, more on the east side, but yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Brown, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming to testify in front of this committee. This will conclude the first panel, and we will reset and begin the second panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you guys for being here. We are now ready for our second panel. Our witnesses today are Mr. Andrew Black, President and CEO of the Liquid Energy Pipeline Association, Mr. Dave Schryver, President and CEO of the American Public Gas Association, Mr. Bill Caram, Executive Director of the Pipeline Safety Trust, and finally, Mr. Rorick, the Vice President for Midstream Policy with the American Petroleum Institute. We thank you all for being here. I now recognize Mr. Black for your opening testimony, and we have your written testimony. Please limit this to 5 minutes as a summary, and we will begin with Mr. Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member. The Liquid Energy Pipeline Association represents pipeline owners and operators delivering transportation fuels like gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, transportation feedstocks like crude oil, home heating fuels like propane and home heating oil, industrial feedstocks like ethane and butane, and low-carbon solutions like renewable diesel, liquefied petroleum gas, and carbon dioxide. This hearing provides the subcommittee an opportunity to take stock of the pipeline industry, how pipelines are needed to get Americans the energy they need, and how pipelines are the safest and most environmentally protective way to move energy. According to publicly available government data from PHMSA, pipelines are the safest way to transport energy. A PHMSA report prepared at the request of Congress compared pipelines to other modes, trucks and trains, over a 10-year period and found pipelines the safest mode. Administrations of both parties have reached this same conclusion. Secretary Hillary Clinton's State Department found a proposed major pipeline to be the safest way to deliver energy. The Obama administration found that rejecting the project and shipping the same energy by rail increased the risk of an oil release by over 800 times and barrels released by 2.6 times. And not only are pipelines the safest way to deliver energy, they're also getting safer. Over the last 5 years, total liquid pipeline incidents are down 28%. Incidents impacting people and the environment are down 16%. But we're not resting on improving pipeline safety. The industry is working to reduce the number of incidents and barrels released even further through industry-wide initiatives around geohazards, corrosion, and leak detection. As members of this subcommittee track the impact of pipelines on greenhouse gas emissions, one factor to recognize is pipelines delivering liquid products for the most part use electric pumps and thus are not a major direct source of greenhouse gases or air emissions. That same Obama administration review found the major pipeline analyzed would release 42% less greenhouse gas emissions than transporting that same energy by rail. Rejecting that pipeline, compared to do nothing at all, would increase greenhouse gas emissions by 1.2 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year, they said. This committee's approach to pipeline safety in the discussion draft makes a lot of sense. Pipeline safety is headed in the right direction with a mature set of regulations. The data does not support harsh new mandates. LEPA supports the committee acting in targeted areas of pipeline safety. Key PHMSA requirements for inspecting and repairing pipelines are now over 20 years old. Pipeline technologies and analytic methods on which they are based are woefully out of date, replaced by new technologies and analytic methods that PHMSA should reflect in its regulations, but often does not. Congress in the 2020 Pipes Act authorized a program to demonstrate cutting-edge pipeline safety technologies and advanced analytics. You talked about it a lot this morning, the Pipeline Safety Enhancement Program. Thank you. The hope is that data from these technology pilots would help PHMSA modernize their regulations. But as you discussed, PHMSA in implementing the program added administrative hurdles and requirements beyond what Congress mandated. We applaud the discussion draft's language to cut through bureaucratic red tape and allow pipeline safety to benefit from technology and innovation. We encourage you to go further and prevent PHMSA from using the bureaucratic special permit process to process applications. I'm encouraged by what I heard. The pipeline industry also supports updating regulatory requirements for carbon dioxide pipelines. A major build-out of CO2 pipelines is necessary to transport CO2 from where it is captured to where it can be permanently stored out of harm's way. Without a network of CO2 pipelines, our nation will not meet low-carbon goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There are already dozens of federal regulatory requirements administered by PHMSA covering pipeline safety. But we agree that in a handful of discrete areas, PHMSA requirements would benefit from updates reflecting the latest approaches and learnings. We support the discussion draft's targeted approach as the best way for PHMSA to issue new CO2 pipeline safety requirements quickly. We encourage you to go further and require operators of CO2 to conduct CO2-specific dispersion modeling. We commend the discussion draft's language increasing penalties for disrupting pipeline operations and for promoting safety improvement through a voluntary information sharing program. We encourage you to go further and reform the PHMSA special permit program and increase enforcement due process as described in my written testimony. We applaud the discussion draft's vision to look holistically at what is needed to help America benefit from pipelines. The draft proposes creative new ideas on pipeline permitting and consumer fuel choice. Pipeline projects which qualify for permits should be able to receive them and in a timely manner. The language to streamline permitting for pipeline construction and maintenance on routes co-located within existing rights-of-way make all the sense of the world. And the language also protects consumers and preserves their freedom to choose the energy source for their home. Thank you for inviting me to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Black. The chair now recognizes Mr. Schryver for his opening statement of 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Schreier. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee today. I am honored to appear today on behalf of the nearly 1,000 communities across the U.S. that own and operate their retail natural gas distribution entities. APGA's members include not-for-profit gas distribution systems owned by cities and other local government entities, all directly accountable to the citizens they serve. Public gas systems focus on providing efficient, safe, reliable, and affordable energy to their consumers and support their communities by delivering fuel to be used for cooking, clothes drying, space and water heating, as well as for various commercial and industrial applications, including electricity generation. Pipeline safety is a top priority of APGA's members. Billions of dollars are invested each year in maintaining the safe operation of gas pipelines through the replacement of aging infrastructure and the utilization of tools and technologies specifically designed to identify and mitigate threats to the system. Congress supported this effort. The Natural Gas Distribution Infrastructure Safety and Modernization Grant Program, authorized by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, funds the repair, replacement, and rehabilitation of existing pipeline infrastructure and the purchase of equipment for leak detection. Program eligibility is limited to city and community-owned utilities. The projects funded through the program are enhancing safety, reducing methane emissions, and improving the lives of the customers and the community. Public gas systems deliver affordable energy safely to Americans. Our members have no obligation to deliver a profit to shareholders. Instead, local officials are responsible for setting rates with the goal of delivering energy to their community as safely and affordably as possible. That mission has become even more vital as Americans are struggling with the burden of inflation. Data from the Energy Information Administration continues to show that natural gas remains the most affordable energy source to heat your home in the winter, and this is not simply because of the low price of gas as a commodity. Homes fueled by natural gas also have the advantage of consuming less energy than electric homes when you consider the full fuel cycle, from source to site. To deliver electricity to homes and businesses, almost 2/3 of that energy involved is used or lost before it ever reaches the point of end use. By contrast, when natural gas is being burned as the direct source of energy, less than 10% is lost between the point of production and the building, making direct use of natural gas almost 3 times more efficient. 2/3 lost versus 10%. The efficiency advantages of natural gas are clear and indisputable. In fact, it is estimated that the average home that uses natural gas appliances for heating, cooking, and clothes drying saves over $1,000 a year on their energy bills compared to homes using electric appliances for those purposes. Natural gas is not only more affordable than electricity, but also more reliable. Only 1 in 800 natural gas customers experience an unplanned outage in a given year. In comparison, each of the 140 million electric customers in the U.S. experience at least 1 outage a year on average. Even though we know natural gas is the most affordable and reliable way to fuel a home, public gas systems are still facing significant challenges. Some of our members have wait lists for would-be customers who want to receive gas service, but they are unable to do so due to supply as a result of limited pipeline capacity. This is a direct result of how difficult it has become to permit new natural gas infrastructure. Other public gas systems are confronting challenges from those who want to ban new natural gas hookups. These bans are being proposed in spite of the fact that carbon dioxide emissions from residences using natural gas for space heating, water heating, cooking, and clothes drying are about 22% lower than carbon dioxide emissions attributable to an all-electric home. And not only does this take away a consumer's right to choose the energy source that fuels their home, if successful, these efforts will lead to higher energy costs for American families while producing little environmental benefit. We urge Congress not to discount the role natural gas can play in America's clean energy future. Natural gas has been delivering emission reductions in the energy sector for decades. With the development of the renewable natural gas industry and the potential for hydrogen, the gas industry can continue to deliver clean energy for American families in the future, utilizing our existing infrastructure and skilled workforce. Again, I thank the committee for the opportunity to testify and look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schryver. The chair now recognizes Mr. Caram for his opening statement of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to speak today. My organization, the Pipeline Safety Trust, was formed after the devastating Olympic pipeline tragedy that stole the lives of 3 boys in Bellingham, Washington in 1999 that the chairwoman spoke about earlier. The U.S. Justice Department was so appalled at the operations of the pipeline company and the lax oversight from the federal government that they asked the courts to set aside money from the settlement to create the Pipeline Safety Trust as an independent national watchdog over the pipeline industry and its regulators. Everyone here shares the goal of 0 incidents. However, pipeline failures continue unabated, and our goal remains far out of reach. Since the last pipeline safety legislation was passed in December of 2020, just over 3 years ago, our nation's pipelines have failed more than once per day, killing or hospitalizing someone every 9 days on average. These nearly 1,500 failures have also caused more than $1.3 billion in property damage. Included in these statistics is a devastating UGI pipeline failure in March of 2023 in a chocolate factory in Reading, Pennsylvania that killed 7 people and sent another 11 to the hospital, caused by a fitting with known safety failures. Another pipeline likely failed in the Gulf of Mexico in November of 2023, spilling an estimated 1 million gallons of crude oil into the Gulf. And just last month, BP's Olympic pipeline, whose tragic failure 25 years ago led to the founding of my organization, failed again, spilling more than 20,000 gallons of gasoline into a creek just 500 feet from elementary school. These are just 3 examples from failures from 2023, and remember there have been nearly 1,500 since the Pipes Act of 2020 passed. I'm sad to say that when looking at the data, we haven't made much progress on pipeline safety. We can, of course, opportunistically pick out time periods to show trends going up or down. However, going back to 2010, an objective starting point, since that is when PHMSA changed some of its criteria, incident trends on all categories of pipelines are statistically flat. We are not making progress. To make meaningful progress on pipeline safety, Congress needs to remove the statutory handcuffs it's placed on PHMSA. It is the only agency with a statutory cost-benefit requirement, an especially difficult hurdle to clear for infrastructure with low probabilities of failure, yet devastating consequences. PHMSA is also prohibited from statute from adopting certain standards that would apply to the existing 3.4 million miles of aging pipelines. Because of this, PHMSA has been unable to require rupture mitigation valves in high-consequence areas, an NTSB recommendation after PG&E's pipeline tragedy in San Bruno, California in 2010. And of course, it's the aging infrastructure of existing pipelines that need this kind of life-saving technology the most. I want to take a moment to discuss one specific pipeline failure from 2020 that was mentioned in the first panel. A carbon dioxide pipeline operated by Denbury failed near Satarsha, Mississippi, sending an asphyxiant that is heavier than air long distances, displacing oxygen. Nearly the entire community of 200 was evacuated, with 45 of them seeking treatment at local hospitals. Residents lost consciousness, suffered seizures, and foamed at the mouth. First responders heroically pulled many to safety while donning scuba gear, their truck engines unable to operate in the oxygen-deprived environment. Experts are predicting a future with 20 times or more the current amount of CO2 pipelines due to congressional incentives. These new pipelines will likely be sited much closer to communities, and CO2 pipelines are dangerously underregulated. There are no PHMSA standards on levels of dangerous impurities, for example. Congress should mandate that PHMSA regulate this and the other equally frightening regulatory gaps before the public can have any kind of confidence in the safety of CO2 pipelines. Given this, along with hydrogen posing its own unique set of new pipeline safety dangers, I was disappointed to see that the draft of the Pipeline Safety Modernization and Expansion Act of 2023 includes a reduction in funding for PHMSA. I was also disappointed that the draft bill includes provisions that have nothing to do with PHMSA or pipeline safety, such as changing the way the EPA regulates Class 6 wells and the way FERC issues permits. To honor the value we place on safe communities, Congress owes it to the American people to give PHMSA more authority and resources and to implement the safety recommendations I have detailed in my written testimony. Thank you again for inviting me today. I look forward to answering any questions the subcommittee may have and helping Congress improve our nation's pipeline safety.
Just to clarify the record, there is no reduction in level of funding for PHMSA. It's a reallocation of that money, but the baseline level stays the same.
Based on the last year in the authorization, it just looking at the numbers, does appear to, maybe it's not from what was appropriated, but from what was authorized, it does appear to be a reduction.
Thank you. I'll now go to Mr. Rorick. Great to see you, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member DeGette, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. My name is Robin Rorick, and I'm Vice President of Midstream Policy at the American Petroleum Institute. On behalf of API, we appreciate the opportunity to testify as part of this important hearing addressing pipeline safety and the reauthorization of the U.S. Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. Every day, our nation's network of more than 500,000 miles of transmission pipelines transports the oil, natural gas, refined products, and low-carbon energy that fuel modern life. America has led the world in reducing carbon dioxide emissions over the past 2 decades, even as our industry has made the United States the world's leading producer of oil and natural gas. The air Americans breathe is cleaner because of innovative improvements to the way energy is produced, transported, refined, and consumed, but we need pragmatic bipartisan energy policies that support the reasonable development of our nation's oil and natural gas resources, including policymaking that encourages investment in critical energy infrastructure like pipelines. Pipelines, one of the safest, most environmentally responsible ways to transport energy to consumers, are in every U.S. state, and our industry is committed to a zero-incident safety culture. Even as barrels delivered and pipeline mileage continues to increase, this strong safety record is improving. As Mr. Black indicated, over the last 5 years, total liquid pipeline incidents have decreased 28%, while incidents impacting people and the environment have declined 16%. We welcome effective policymaking to help continuously improve pipeline safety. We applaud this committee's efforts to develop a comprehensive approach to PHMSA reauthorization through its draft bill, the Pipeline Safety Modernization and Expansion Act of 2023. API is pleased that the draft bill addresses many critical issues that our industry has long advocated for, including a functional technology pilot program, a confidential voluntary information sharing system for operators, criminal penalties for damaging pipeline infrastructure, and a required rulemaking on pipeline transportation of carbon dioxide. These are common sense policy changes that will help enhance pipeline safety and spur innovation as we advance a zero-incident future. We appreciate the committee's recognition of another important issue linked to pipeline safety, permitting reform. Issues your committee have identified with regard to the permitting for the modification, expansion, or maintenance of existing pipeline facilities are often overlooked, but are critical to safely maintaining our energy supply chain. The committee's proposal also reflects an important opportunity to modernize the permitting system by making it easier for operators to expand their infrastructure by co-locating resources in existing rights-of-way. Finally, the draft bill improves the risk assessment provision in the Pipeline Safety Act by clarifying that costs and benefits considered during the rulemaking process should be limited to those within the United States. This important requirement ensures that benefits of a regulation justify its costs and makes more effective rulemakings that appropriately target specific pipeline safety needs. This legislation is a strong starting point, and we also encourage this committee to consider additional provisions which we believe will complement your draft bill and work to improve pipeline safety. In my written testimony, I recommend that Congress direct PHMSA to allow pipeline operators to base their storage tank inspection frequency on risk-based engineering principles, require PHMSA to review and update the industry standards they incorporate by reference at regular intervals, and provide clarity as to what agency regulates in-plant piping at refineries. I want to be conscious of my time, but would welcome any opportunity to work with you and your staff on these important issues. As a final matter, we also urge this committee to conduct diligent oversight of the agency's efforts to issue new regulations related to leak detection and repair, a mandate that from the 2020 Pipeline Safety Bill, and that was discussed earlier. While API supports PHMSA's goal of addressing methane emissions, if enacted, the current proposal would result in limited emission reductions compared with billions of dollars in compliance costs disproportionately borne by small companies that operate in some of the lowest risk pipelines in the U.S. Our industry is actively engaged in the regulatory process to help PHMSA craft a workable final LDAR rule, but we believe this initial proposal goes beyond the scope of what Congress intended and warrants attention as you consider another reauthorization bill. In closing, let me stress that pipeline safety is not a partisan issue, and our industry needs effective legislation to meet the dual challenge of answering ever-growing energy demand while leading the world in emission reductions. API appreciates the opportunity to engage in today's hearing as you work towards a final pipeline safety bill. And with that, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member DeGette, and members of the subcommittee, this concludes my prepared statement, and I look forward to the conversation that we're going to have today.
Well, I thank the gentleman. I thank all of you for your testimony. We'll move into the question and answer portion of the hearing. I'll begin by recognizing myself. First off, I talk about four main things when I think about energy: produce, deliver, utilize, and export. We need to produce more American resources. We need to deliver those resources to be utilized to generate power and transportation fuels, and we need to export more to help our friends and neighbors around the world, and even help them lower their carbon emissions by using cleaner burning U.S. produced natural gas, take coal offline, lower their carbon emissions. It's a win-win for everybody. But in order to produce more, you have to have somewhere to put it. You have to deliver more. That's pipelines. It could do transmission lines too as you produce more electricity and deliver those. I get that. Produce, deliver, utilize, and export. Delivery is what we're focused on today, and this nation needs more pipelines, period. Nobody's arguing that we don't need a better built-out pipeline infrastructure. I mentioned the Progressive Policy Institute paper recently, and it's a left-leaning group that wrote a paper, and they said we need more infrastructure in this country, mainly for export, but for utilization. So thank you guys for being here. Safety is a big part of that. And pipelines deliver these resources, whether it's liquid fuel or gaseous substance, safely. They deliver it more safely than trucks and trains. That's been proven. 3.4 million miles of pipelines in this country do it every day in a safe manner. Safety is important. Mr. Rorick, I want to ask you, as you mentioned, our approach to pipeline safety realization is a more ambitious and comprehensive approach compared to what we've seen in the past. We recognize a critical nexus between pipeline safety and the need for a functional, modernized permitting system to expand critical infrastructure, pipeline infrastructure that we need. One provision in this discussion draft authorizes FERC to issue any federal permit required for the construction, modification, expansion, inspection, repair, or maintenance of existing pipeline or a new pipeline located within an existing right-of-way if a state has failed to act in more than 1 year. The aim of this provision is to make it easier for operators to expand their pipeline infrastructure by co-locating resources in existing right-of-ways. Could this help?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that we've advocated for long with regards to permitting reform, and permitting is a complicated issue covered by multiple agencies, multiple committees of jurisdiction, including yours, is that really what industry needs is a permitting process that's timely, it's predictable, it's transparent, and it's consistent. So any effort along those lines to provide those core principles is a step in the right direction.
Certainly provides a lot of assurances to the marketplace.
Absolutely.
And thank you for that. Are there any environmental benefits to the approach?
Certainly, to the extent that we can make sure that it's all considered. I think part of this discussion on oftentimes a misperception for the industry, Mr. Chairman, is that the industry is looking for workarounds to the permitting processes or streamlining. That's absolutely not true. What we're looking for is a permitting process that maintains those pillars, and if it does so in an appropriate way, it's judicially durable so that it can withstand court and we don't end up in this sort of litigation back and forth that just delays pipeline projects and ultimately has killed many of them, as you've indicated before.
Absolutely. We talked about gas and gas bans and whatnot. I'm not going to go through all my written statement time. Mr. Schryver, how are these gas bans inhibiting energy affordability and reliability?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for the question. As mentioned in my testimony, natural gas is the most affordable, resilient, and reliable manner to fuel a home. When you put a ban in place, you take away the affordability. You make it more expensive for the homeowner to fuel their home. You impact reliability as well. Even during Storm Uri, when the price of natural gas went high, it was still reliable. The gas was still getting to the homes.
I can tell you right now, there's a lot of people across this country with this winter storm, the one we just had and the one that's coming, that appreciate the fact they have gas logs and gas availability to heat their homes and cook and other things.
I tell a story. I'll tell it real quick. Our Vice President of Government Relations, Stuart, who's behind me, he's a Mississippi State fan. And he was in Oxford, Mississippi, so he was in Ole Miss territory during his...
22 is closed right now.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So.
During Storm Uri, and he took his children to a diner, and the diner was going through rolling blackouts. And the diner was still cooking because the guy had an iPhone and a gas stove, so he was still putting out food.
Lit it up with his iPhone and cooked it on the gas stove. Wow. So, Mr. Black, do we have enough pipeline capacity in the United States? You heard my rant, but I want to hear it from you.
We can always use more, right? Our nation is at historic levels of production, and we need to get more to where Americans can benefit from lower prices, and more to the ports where we can export it, helping us in geopolitics and reducing carbon emissions worldwide.
Yeah, more capacity means lower cost. Still have to be able to deliver it. Producers I talk to said they can produce more from existing wells without drilling anything else, especially in the Marcellus. They just don't have anywhere to put it. I want to give them pipelines to help them deliver that to my utilities and others that can utilize it, and the export side of it as well. My time's expired, so I'll now go to Ranking Member DeGette for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Caram, after the chairman debated you over the budget amounts, I had staff look it up, and here's what it is. Under current law, there is $238 million authorized for PHMSA. Under this draft bill, it's $196 million authorized. Under the fiscal year 2023 appropriation, actually $190 million was actually appropriated. So in fact, under this draft bill of the authorization, which is this committee, it is quite a bit less. And you were right. And this leads me into my questioning.
Pause for time for just a second. What I said was it just flatlines it from the appropriated amount.
Well, I'm just saying that.
190 to 190.
Yeah, but the authorized was a lot more. That's what I'm
Right.
saying.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you. But the reason why I think this is important is because of the task that we have ahead of us. So there have been 1,486 reportable pipeline failures since Congress passed the Pipes Act in 2020. Is that correct, Mr. Caram?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that sounds correct.
Okay, and since the Pipes Act in 2020, pipeline failures have resulted in property damage of over $1.3 billion, which costs over $1 million every day. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, you state in your testimony that you believe we're not making real progress on pipeline safety. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And can you briefly tell us why that is?
So we go back to 2010. There's some changes that PHMSA made on how they collect data on incidents at that time. And so rather than trying to normalize or standardize data going back farther, we think that's an objective time period to start. And when we look at that and use, statistic confidence intervals and things like that, the incident rates, when looking at all incidents and when looking at significant incidents impacting people in the environment, are all statistically flat.
So do you think that if we reduce resources for PHMSA from the reauthorization from 238 million to 196 million, will that help or hurt these numbers?
I believe that would hurt the numbers.
Now, let me ask you this, because the chairman says, well, in the draft bill, we just keep the authorization the same as the 2023 appropriation roughly. Do you think that would help or hurt these numbers?
Well,
if we actually gave roughly 190 million.
To keep in mind, the legislation would also increase the grant obligations of the organization, of the agency, and so that net amount left behind for them would decrease even under flat funding. It also introduces a new program, the Voluntary Information Sharing System. We have no idea how much that would really cost, but it would be a very large program that they would have to pick up. So the numbers left over for what the agency does day in, day out for pipeline safety
So
would
there's
reduce.
more obligations and less money, is what
Correct.
you're saying.
Yeah.
So that's not going to help with the current situation that we have, is it?
Correct.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about PHMSA's funding. The majority's pipeline, well, never mind, I already asked those questions. So I want to ask the other gentlemen who are here a simple question. All of you believe we should have pipeline safety. Is that right, Mr. Black?
Certainly.
Mr. Schryver?
Correct.
Mr. Rorick?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we all think we should have pipeline safety. We all think that that consumers should be able to get their energy sources, natural gas or whatever, safely. And so I would think that we would be able to give the money that we need to make this happen on a bipartisan basis. I would think we'd be able to authorize it in this committee, and then we would be able to work with our appropriators. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I think, gentlelady, you know, the PIPES Act actually created a lot of programs at PHMSA that weren't funded in the appropriations bill as well. So a lot of schematics here. I'll now go to the chairman of the full committee, Ms. Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Rorick, Mr. Black, Mr. Schryver, are you concerned that PHMSA's mission appears to be shifting from a safety regulator to more of an environmental regulator?
I'll go first. We want to make sure that we certainly see that PHMSA's core role is safety, and there is certainly pressure for PHMSA to expand into other areas. So we want to make sure that we preserve that core role as we move forward.
Okay, and to all of you, as you answer this question, could you provide some examples of proposed regulations or actions where you feel that PHMSA has failed to act as a risk-based regulations, on risk-based regulations to improve safety? So I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Mr. Rorick?
Sure. So if you look, and the Deputy Administrator covered this at some length, but we do feel that their leak detection and repair rule did go beyond first and foremost what Congress mandated them to do in looking at gathering lines, particularly at the Class C gathering lines, these low-pressure gathering lines in rural areas. And it did it in such a way where it didn't, it's expanding the risk-based approach to the point where we're looking at everything at this point, and consequently, we're not taking the appropriate approach to managing some of that risk.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Black.
Two things come to mind. One, Congress in 2020 directed PHMSA to do the Pipeline Safety Enhancement Program, and they went beyond what Congress told them to do, decided to add an environmental review under NEPA for an application that shouldn't need it. Second is, while PHMSA has been working on other things, they have not acted on another thing Congress told them to do, which is a rulemaking on operating status of idled pipes. There's something between abandoned and fully operating that Congress recognized needs its own distinct style of regulations. PHMSA has made no progress on that, and we see no signs that it's a priority.
Thank you, Mr. Schryver.
We support the intent of the leak detection rule, but also have concerns with it, both in terms of timing. We believe the 6-month time frame rolled out is not achievable or realistic, and we also have concerns about the rule as it pertains to the frequency of leak surveys.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Black and Mr. Rorick, I believe we need to expand our existing pipeline infrastructure and build new projects to meet growing demand. Unfortunately, some states are blocking interstate pipelines for political reasons. It is clear to me that they would rather keep it in the ground, even if it means harming grid reliability and spiking energy prices. Mr. Black, do you support giving FERC additional authority to issue permits if a state agency fails to act?
Yes.
Mr. Rorick?
As I indicated before, ma'am, we certainly would support any provision that would provide that transparency, predictability, and the timeliness that we need to get permits.
Thank you. Mr. Schryver, we're starting to see some states and local governments pass gas bans at the urging of radical environmental groups. These bans are clearly unconstitutional and are creating major hurdles to getting affordable, reliable energy to Americans. Can you talk about the effect of these gas bans and what it means for your publicly owned gas distribution companies?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. We believe the homeowner, the consumer, is best suited, and they should have the freedom of choice to choose the appliance that best fits their needs. If they want to put an electric stove in, they should be entitled to. Likewise with gas. You know, if they, as I laid out in my testimony, there are benefits to natural gas appliances. They're more affordable, more reliable, more resilient. And despite all these benefits, we have wait lists in some areas of the country where there's not capacity to get the gas to the consumers, so the consumers that want the gas can't get it.
Thank you. Do you support, as a follow-up, do you support including provision in the pipeline safety reauthorization to stop gas bans?
We do.
Mr. Black, do your members support language to stop gas bans?
We support the fuel choice language in your discussion draft, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for being here. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now go to Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last year in Wappingers Falls, New York, a little south of my district, a gas line ruptured, resulting in a massive fire at a multifamily apartment building. 15 people were injured, including 2 children and 5 first responders. That gas line was damaged by an excavator. So, Mr. Caram, is excavation damage a common threat to natural gas infrastructure?
Yes, PHMSA tracks operators report on every incident what the cause of that incident was. A lot of times there are multiple causes that interact with each other, and that data is available to the public. And yes, excavation damage is certainly one of the leading causes, but there are a lot of other causes as well. Operator failure. In my testimony, I broke out incident trends and I grouped the causes together based on those that are within direct control of the operator and those that are more indirect control of the operator. And excavation damages would be more indirect control of the operator, and those causes are significantly lower than those that are under direct control of the operator.
Thank you. And what regulations are in place to try to prevent these incidents, and are they working?
Well, on excavation damage, there's operators required to have damage prevention programs and public awareness campaigns that are part of the regulations. It's then left up to the states to how they implement those, and there's not a lot of standardization. Some national organizations have put forth what the best practices should be in a state program, and many states don't follow those best practices.
Yeah, are there states that stand out as being the most driven to protect from this kind of damage?
I don't have those offhand.
But there are different degrees.
There are.
Hearing you say. Okay, and what are some things that states can do, or PHMSA can require states to do, to improve call before you dig 811 programs?
I mean, I believe they are doing a lot. I think where the most progress could be made here is by Congress ordering some of those best practices as a requirement to the states, and I believe there's probably a lot of consensus around that among stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. So is it just a voluntary thing now, or is it just a guideline, or are they required to?
They're not required, and I imagine others could speak more to this than I can, but the PHMSA has a grant program, and each state is graded on how well of a program they do, but there aren't very many consequences to a state, not holding up those standards.
Okay, thank you. And in addition to excavation, I'm certain there are other safety threats to pipelines. So can you, sir, describe how natural hazards such as seismicity, erosion, floods, hurricanes, and wildfires, which pose a risk to pipeline infrastructure, how could they be dealt with in a more effective way?
Yeah, that's a great question. We lump all of those together and call them geohazards, and land movement, earthquakes, and all of those are growing causes and threats to pipeline integrity. There aren't a lot of specific standards in the PHMSA regulations about geohazards. I think historically they've been thought of as an act of God, but as we move towards this goal of zero incidents, that includes failures from geohazards. Operators within high consequence areas need to mitigate against those geohazards in integrity management plans, but there are very few regulations requiring that kind of mitigation outside of high consequence areas.
So that's an area where we can further ensure safety requirements?
Yes, Congress could tell PHMSA that operators need to have mitigation, geohazard mitigation plans on all of their pipelines.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate your responses, and with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now go to the Chair of the Health Subcommittee, Mr. Guthrie from Kentucky, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the time. Thanks for the witnesses for being here today. And Mr. Blecker, Mr. Rorick, if you would care to comment, Mr. Caram just said that, I think this is a quote, I didn't get it all down right. Many states don't follow best practices in pipeline safety. Is that your experience, that many states don't follow best practices?
Excavation damage prevention, if that's our topic here, we find a lot of we find a lot of states are not doing good enough in either enforcing their excavation damage laws or in eliminating exemptions to the one-call program. If a call is made and it's properly marked, the odds of an incident are way down. And excavation damage is a big threat to pipeline safety. So improved performance by the states and improved oversight by Congress on that state program could help safety.
Okay, Is you find the same thing, Mr.
Yeah, we would completely agree with that, and there's a ton of work that industry continues. It's a constant effort and constant work to continue to reach out to construction companies, maintain the 811 program. The oil and gas industry is one of the largest contributors to maintain that 811 program, which covers all underground infrastructure, telecommunications, et cetera. But that's a constant effort that we're
But that's an issue with the states and the enforcement from the states?
Yeah, there's incredible variability there. So it's work that we're doing both at the federal level as well as at the state level.
That's good to know. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that to me. So, Mr. Black, the Pipes Act of 2020 authorized PHMSA to establish the Pipeline Safety Enhancement Program to demonstrate effectiveness of new pipeline technologies and analytical methods. However, no pipeline operators have applied to PHMSA under the program to participate in that. And I asked that to Mr. Brown, if you saw the testimony earlier today, and it's more of a process issue and process getting up and running. What's your experience with that and why operators aren't participating?
Well, I followed your conversation with the deputy administrator with great interest, because you're absolutely right. You established this program with great intent, and they blew it on implementation. They made it untenable. No operator found it worthwhile despite the potential benefits.
What's an untenable? Just to what's your definition of untenable? Just
well, they would require use of the bureaucratic special permit program, which we've encouraged you to prevent. They required an environmental review under NEPA for what's a temporary pilot program. No need for that. Congress didn't call for that. You've remedied a lot of the issues in the discussion draft where it become law. I would expect that operators would be applying and we'd be able to get these safety benefits.
So it wasn't just a matter of not having the program ready. There were specific things that are preventing you from participating. You just listed.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So also, have you found that PHMSA is open to new technology and improvements from you guys on the pipeline safety, or is it?
Yes, I believe so. We conduct collaboration on R&D. PHMSA does do their own R&D funding just as we do. That can be better, that should be quicker, that should be targeted on strategic issues. But this Pipeline Safety Enhancement Program is the perfect place to show that those work, so the PHMSA can get the data from that and modernize their regulations so that we're not using 20-year-old know-how. Let's use the technology as it should be.
Okay, so could you also, maybe Mr. Schryver as well, some examples of what technologies are out there that should be implemented that aren't being implemented because of just the regulatory process or trying to approve them and get them done? What kind of things are we talking about?
Pipelines are inspected with MRI technology that you might find at a doctor's office that can collect terabytes of information as they go through the pipe. And there's advanced learning now on what the features that this inspection technology find. And we now know that we know more about what type of features lead to what type of incidents and timelines. So let's demonstrate that so that PHMSA can modernize their regulations to reflect the technology.
So what do the regulations say that prevents you from doing that?
They're based on old standards, more than 20 years old.
So they just want to accept that as new information?
They have not updated them.
Okay. So, Mr. Schryver?
One of the things, anytime there's an incident, we learn from it, and one of the things that we appreciate in this bill is the voluntary information sharing platform as it pertains to pipeline safety.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of technologies are you seeing out there that are
I mean, our members
that are ready to launch, but we just can't get through the bureaucracy?
Our members run the breadth, our members range in size from Philadelphia Gas Works to half of our members have 5 employees or less. So these are really small communities utilizing a wide variety of technologies. One of the things that's really helpful to us is the infrastructure grant program, as it's providing these small communities with funds to assist them in the repair and replacement of infrastructure.
But how is PHMSA preventing you from getting this done, I guess, implementing?
The program's moving along. The first year has been done. The second year of the program is going to be additional funding, twice as much as the first year, so that has helped us.
Okay, thanks. I yield back.
Gentleman, time's expired, and I'll go to Mr. Cardenas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate this opportunity to have a dialogue with the witnesses, and appreciate your opinions and your perspectives so we can share with the American people what's going on out there. As has been mentioned, pipeline incidents are incredibly dangerous. Someone every 9 days is killed or injured by pipeline failures, and that's not even considering the longer-term health effects of air and water pollution, et cetera, that affect communities for decades and even longer. These are very real impacts, and more often than not, this devastates communities, American children, and American families. Unfortunately, far too often, communities are cut out of regulatory processes, despite bearing the majority of the burden when projects go wrong. With that in mind, I'd like to discuss PHMSA's public engagement, or sometimes a lack thereof of public engagement. Mr. Caram, as you noted in your written testimony, PHMSA currently lacks an independent division that would ensure effective public engagement and education in pipeline safety.
Yeah, that's correct. I would say historically, public engagement has not been one of PHMSA's strong points, and the public is often frustrated. The Pipeline Safety Trust, we hear from a lot of members of the public who have reached out to PHMSA with questions and haven't gotten anywhere, and they come to us very frustrated. There's also, the multiple jurisdictional issues. FERC points them to PHMSA, PHMSA points them to FERC, and other agencies as well. And so we deal a lot with some frustrated public. I will say that under the current administration, there have been improvements to PHMSA's public engagement, having a public meeting in Freeport after the LNG failure, having a public meeting about CO2 pipeline safety in Des Moines, Iowa, are good steps forward. But we believe that a independent office dedicated to public engagement would help tremendously.
And the community liaison program within PHMSA, is it falling short today? What can take place to make it better?
We do hear a lot of frustration from the public who have worked with various community liaisons under PHMSA.
Is it stretched too thin? Is it just a model that wouldn't work under any circumstance?
I'm not sure exactly what is causing the shortfall there, but I believe more resources and some independence would help tremendously.
Okay, thank you. I understand that bipartisan T&I bill changes that program into a more robust Office of Public Engagement. Could you talk about some of the benefits of the changes made in the T&I bill, that what additional changes would be necessary for any pipeline safety reauthorization to give an Office of Public Engagement the teeth it needs to be effective?
Yeah, thank you for that. The T&I bill does have a carve-out for this group and rename it the Office of Public Engagement, which would give some congressional oversight and some accountability to the program. And it would provide significant funding to the program that it doesn't have right now, all of which are good steps forward. I believe it still lacks the independence of, that would allow it to be a true asset to the public. I think we've seen some success with the Office of Public Participation for FERC. Very different agency, we're talking very different issues that they would deal with, but the independence model, I think, would serve PHMSA well.
Give me an example of what you referred to as a better independence model.
Well, the Office of Public Participation with FERC, when we have members of the public, generally we're talking pipeline safety and PHMSA, but there's a cross current of issues. Before the Office of Public Participation, when we would send them to FERC, they would come back to us still just equally frustrated, and we have seen the public getting answers from that Office of Public Participation that they weren't getting before.
Thank you. Could you elaborate on some of the ways that such an office could help communities in the aftermath of an accident or some incident?
Absolutely. That's one of the areas where you really see the public engagement of the agency falling short. They are so focused on the investigation and things like that, understandably, that we don't want to pull any resources from that. But there's no public information officer, there's no point person, and so again, we get a lot of those as a nonprofit, questions in the aftermath of a failure, and just having one person that's that point person of an information officer that members of the public who just had this pipeline explode in their community could go to for answers would be tremendously helpful.
Okay, thank you. My time having expired, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now go to Michigan, home of Big Blue, Tim Wahlberg, for 5 minutes.
National champions, and fully in the pipeline. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel for being here. Mr. Black, the discussion draft requires the Secretary to establish a confidential VIS for pipeline operators. Why is a VIS necessary, and how will it impact pipeline safety and communication across the industry?
The voluntary information sharing system would create a safe space for pipeline operators, regulators, and analysts to talk about pipeline incidents and learn from them. That's our goal, is reducing incidents. Something similar, of course, has been done in aviation, and we've seen the benefits from that. So we support the inclusion of a voluntary information sharing system, and are glad that's in the draft.
When in the age of AI, to
Yes, sir.
have actual information
Right.
that will be the foundation for all that you folks learn, especially when you're talking about what you do inside the pipelines with an MRI, as it were, and get patterns. Thank you. Mr. Rorick and Mr. Schryver, in 2020, PHMSA issued an NPRM on class location change requirements, which would increase flexibility and allow operators to address class location changes with safety management practices rather than spending billions to replace perfectly safe pipelines. Since then, PHMSA has not acted in implementing the rule. How has this lack of action undercut your members' ability to innovate and invest in modern technology and safety practices? Mr. Schryver?
Go ahead.
As I mentioned, a lot of our members are small systems. So there's always resource challenges associated with small systems. The grant program, the infrastructure grant program, has helped our members immensely in terms of getting the resources they need to rehabilitate and replace infrastructure. In terms of the program you mentioned, can I get you something in writing on that?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Rorick?
Sure. So the class location issue is a perfect example where the regulations have not kept up with the advancements in technologies and the capabilities of industry to assess and monitor its pipeline. So it really forces industry to take somewhat of a binary approach to just say, if population densities around a pipeline get to a certain point, you got to pull out that pipeline. In addition to disrupting service to downstream operators, you also have to evacuate that line to do the work. Which means in many cases you have to vent that to the atmosphere. We heard earlier today that in some cases, or last year, that there was enough natural gas released to the atmosphere from pipeline blowdowns to heat 10,000, to provide energy to 10,000 homes, as an example. We can avoid a lot of that to try to meet the climate concerns that a lot of folks have. That would be great. In addition, many of those pipelines don't have to be pulled out. We don't have to put workers in harm's way by using heavy equipment to pull those lines out. If we're able to use the modern technology that we have today to assess those lines, we can determine that many of them can be left in place, monitored to make sure that they operate safely.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And continuing that thought, Mr. Black, I recently had the honor of being named as a vice chairman of the Conservative Climate Caucus. Strange name, Conservative Climate Caucus. But I believe in being a good steward of our environment and responsibly use the resources that we have, that we've been talking about. That's why it's baffled me to hear and see and feel the opposition to increasing America's pipeline capacity. Can you explain how pipelines compare to other modes of transportation when it comes to environmental impact and emissions?
Well, there are less greenhouse gas emissions involved in pipeline transportation of any fuel or liquid, including CO2, right? When you build a pipeline and take transportation from some other mode onto a pipeline, you're reducing GHG emissions. Now we're seeing that pipelines are also necessary to move CO2 itself from where it's generated to where it can be stored. And so our nation's going to need a build out of a lot of CO2 pipelines to achieve the goals that your caucus is probably working on.
And it also gives more opportunity for those transportation resources above ground to be used for other purposes that we're having challenges with right now. So thank you. I appreciate the responses, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and I'll go to Ms. Fletcher for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for sharing your thoughts today. Glad to see you here, and really want to follow up on the questions that I asked Deputy Administrator Brown in the last panel and portion of our hearing, because obviously we're very focused in this legislative hearing on the reauthorization legislation, and I was glad to work on it and to work with many of your members who are headquartered or near my district in Houston when we did the PIPES Act in 2020, and really want to hear from you about a couple of the challenges that we have been trying to address for several years. So Mr. Black, I want to start with you. Could you talk a little bit about some of the impediments that your member companies have faced when it comes to participating in the technology pilot program? I asked Administrator Brown about that, and that's something very important to my constituents. And I think it's clearly not working. They've had no applications. It's something that I know so many of your members want to be able to participate in. And so could you talk a little bit about the key changes that you think are necessary to get new technology into the field and work on these improvements to pipeline safety?
Thank you for your longstanding interest in this. I think you achieved a win today in your discussion with Deputy Administrator Brown. One of our things that we've seen that has been a failure in the Pipeline Safety Enhancement Program implementation by PHMSA is the use of the bureaucratic special permits program. And I believe he acknowledged to you that maybe that's not a good fit. That's great. That's a recommendation to the committee to tell that to PHMSA. Another one is remedied by the discussion draft. It's the requirement of an environmental review under NEPA of something that really is not appropriate for that. We believe these projects are certainly going to be positive for safety and for the environment, but we need to be able to move fast so that we can get this data and test these new technologies and analytics. So thank you for your help.
Well, of course, I think we all have an interest in seeing these new technologies advance. And so, Mr. Caram, I want to switch over to you and ask, I understand that you testified before the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which has concurrent jurisdiction here with us. And so could you talk a little bit about the issues that were included in the draft of the PIPES Act for 2023 that were negotiated in that bill that aren't in the draft bill before us today that you think we should be considering including the kinds of bipartisan proposals that came out of the T&I committee that this committee should also include it?
Thank you for the question. In the T&I bill, there was in their version of the voluntary information sharing system, they had dedicated funding for that. That was additive to PHMSA's allocation, and that would be critical to, I think, to that program. There was an increase in PHMSA's ability to fine operators who are out of compliance. And there was also, we believe the data is showing that the integrity management system, which is really critical to the pipeline safety regulations, maybe isn't working as well as we all hope. And so there, in the T&I bill, there was a study looking at how effective the integrity management program is and where it's falling short and how to make it better. And I think that would be critical as well.
Terrific. Well, I want to ask one more question of Mr. Rorick, but I will submit a question for the record for all of you that if there are provisions that are in that draft legislation or in that legislation that aren't in ours that you think we should be looking at, I'd love to get your input from everybody on the panel. But Mr. Rorick, with the time I have left, I would like to ask you to explain to our committee why the modernization to pipeline inspection in the class location rule is so important for your member companies when it comes to older and somewhat outdated methods that have a higher environmental impact and expensive costs. I think that would be really useful for us.
Yes, and be mindful of the time. I'll be brief. And we've talked a lot about the issue, and you've highlighted the issue even with Mr. Black. The reality of it is that since that class location rule was originally developed, technology has advanced dramatically. Being able to take advantage, true advantage of that technology, being able to take advantage of the lessons that industry has learned in the decades that that rule has been around would help us determine whether or not we need to take the risk to remove those pipelines out, or whether they're perfectly fine where they are and we need to continue to monitor them. So it's a much more efficient and effective way to manage the pipeline system.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And I think, Mr. Chairman, it's a record that I got all of my questions in both panels under time until I just made that comment.
You just went over those, so yeah.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. Mr. Palmer's recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. I thank the witnesses for being here. Mr. Black, obviously we're very dependent on affordable reliable, affordable energy. It's important for our, not only our economic security, our national security. Do pipelines make us less reliant on adversaries for energy?
Absolutely. Pipelines make us less reliant on other forms of energy, on imports. Is that what you're asking me to talk about?
Well, I'm going to make a point because that's an obvious answer.
Yes.
But one of the things that I've tried to point out to people about the war in Ukraine is it did not create the energy crisis, it exposed it. And what happened in Europe was in this rush to renewables, they let their infrastructure decline. They didn't increase it or advance it. And then when the war started, they found themselves in a very difficult situation. And that's my concern about our own economy and our own national security. We have enormous reserves of natural gas and other hydrocarbon fuels. It's interesting that the European Union in 22 declared natural gas climate friendly. It's reminds me of something Henry Kissinger once said, there's nothing clears the mind quite so well as the absence of alternatives. And that's what Europeans found themselves confronted with. So when we're talking about our pipeline infrastructure, obviously safety is our top priority, but supply ought to be a major part of this equation. And because it's critical to our economy, but it's also critical to our national security. That's really where I'm trying to go with this, and using Europe as a proof positive example of that.
Well, you're absolutely right, Congressman. And as you know, our nation is producing more crude oil than ever before. And when the Ukraine-Russia war started, we were able to export excess crude oil, refined petroleum products, natural gas liquids, liquid natural gas there. And look at what's happening now. We have a war there. We have unease in the Middle East. We have shipping issues in the Red Sea. And the price for Americans really hasn't budged. Why is that? Because we have a lot of American production and we have a lot of American pipeline capacity to spread throughout our country that product. We can always do more and better, but we need to recognize the benefits of the production of the pipeline. Thank you for doing that.
Well, Germany is a prime example of this. I've worked for 2 international engineering companies prior to running a think tank, prior to losing my mind and running for Congress. But Germany built 5 LNG facilities in 180 days. Again, nothing clears the mind quite so well as the absence of alternatives. The other thing that I've communicated I've been meeting with a number of European diplomats and others, is that if we haven't learned anything else from the war in Ukraine, it ought to be this one fundamental principle, that no nation should be reliant on an adversarial nation for something as critical to their economic security and national security as energy. Which has led me to looking at some other ways that the United States can really be beneficial in dealing with adversarial nations like China, for instance, is working in places where we have emerging economies who are not going to deny themselves access to reliable, affordable energy like Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America, to help them build out their energy infrastructure through private investment, form a Western Hemisphere alliance, so to speak. There are nations out there that have huge reserves of natural gas. Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, they probably have enough natural gas in the ground in Europe to meet their needs for 60 years. That's part of what we need to be talking about when we're talking about what we do here. We want to make sure we have all of the safety protocols in place for our pipelines, but we need to be building out the infrastructure here through private investment and create opportunities where we can have private investment in these emerging economies. And step in there where China's stepping in. They're building coal-fired plants. If China converted to natural gas, it would cut their emissions by more than half, the equivalent of 500 million gasoline-powered cars. It would cut it to the equivalent of what India emits in a year. So I know that's a little bit off the beaten path there, Mr. Chairman, but I think it should be part of the discussion going forward in terms of our advancing pipelines. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now go to the gentlelady from Washington State, Ms. Schryver, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here for this discussion. Mr. Caram, I would like to focus on your testimony regarding hydrogen, specifically pipeline safety. Thank you, by the way, for mentioning the Olympic pipeline tragedy. As I'm sure you know, the Pacific Northwest region was selected as one of 7 nationwide hydrogen hubs that will share a total of $7 billion of DOE investment. And I was so proud to lead a bipartisan effort to bring this funding to the region to harness clean hydropower to produce the greenest hydrogen in the nation. And this is incredibly exciting. This is one part of the equation, though. It's not the end of the discussion. As you've cited in your testimony, large knowledge gaps need to be filled with further research on hydrogen transportation pipelines. Hydrogen leaks faster and is more volatile than methane gas, and can also contribute indirectly as a greenhouse gas in the event of an unintentional leak through impacts on methane and on ozone. So that's why it's important to take a really thoughtful approach to ensure that producers and users can transport hydrogen fuel without leaks or accidents. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit about the research that still needs to be done to understand the compatibility of using, for example, existing pipelines to transmit hydrogen.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I think right at the end there, you identified really where most of the research needs to be done and where most of the knowledge gaps are, and that's the conversion of existing pipelines in order to carry hydrogen, whether as a blend or pure hydrogen. Hydrogen, in addition to the safety issues in the flammability range and its indirect greenhouse gas contributions, it also poses integrity issues on pipelines. And I think operators have a pretty good handle on building a new pipeline and how to move hydrogen relatively safely when they are starting from zero with all of those components. But taking an existing pipeline that was built to move methane and knowing each piece in that very complicated system, and it only takes one piece of that system to fail to lead to a tragedy. And so for operators to know that every single piece in an existing system that was built for methane is able to also move hydrogen, and at what blend do we start to see problems, that's where the knowledge gaps are, and we would like to see a lot of more research there.
Thank you. Yeah, retrofitting may or may not be tricky. So I would have to agree with that, and thank you for devoting attention to that. I also wanted to note, like my colleague Ms. Fletcher, that the reauthorization of PHMSA marked up in TNI does have a language to study safety in hydrogen transportation. And so I wanted to urge, just as she did, I would urge this subcommittee to consider similar legislative action on this issue as well, and would agree with her desire to get more information about what other elements were included in the TNI bill that we really should be thoughtful about and also include in ours. So thank you, and I will yield back.
May I add one thing?
Of course, I have a minute left.
Congresswoman, I apologize. I just want to add one thing that wasn't in the TNI bill, but that was in our testimony. Right now, for an operator to blend hydrogen into their system, the only reporting that needs to be done to PHMSA is the predominant product, and that's been interpreted to mean, whatever is over 50% in the pipe. So operators can be blending things like propane and hydrogen into their system without needing to report to PHMSA. And we would love to see a requirement of reporting blending components to PHMSA. We've seen safety issues with blending propane into existing systems as a peak shaving, and I believe it will become more of an issue with hydrogen as well.
One more question, 18 seconds. Can you talk about the advantages of blending? Is this like ethanol with gasoline, or is there something else I should know about blending hydrogen with methane, for example?
Because hydrogen poses unique safety issues, the more of it in the pipe, the more you'll see those safety issues show up.
Okay, we'll talk later about advantages. Thank you. Now I yield back.
I wanted to hear the answer to that too, because I don't know. Generally yields back. Now go to Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first I want to go to Mr. Rorick of API. I mentioned PHMSA's latest so-called, quote, leak detection and repair regulations that I'm concerned have more to do with appeasing climate zealots at the White House than rather than making American communities safer. You mentioned in your testimony, Mr. Rorick, the need for better cost-benefit analysis when implementing such a rule. I've got the DOT announcement right here where Secretary Buttigieg touts this rule where he claims it will, quote, keep communities safe and help curb climate change. Now, even if such a claim were true, in your view, is it PHMSA's job to curb climate change?
Well, we think that PHMSA should be focused on safety first and foremost. And what they've done with this rule is they've gone beyond the statutory request from Congress that they develop a requirement on gathering lines, for instance, to look at Class C gathering lines that are in extremely rural areas. So, and if you look at their cost-benefit analysis, it just doesn't bear out that the costs associated with fulfilling the requirements as PHMSA has laid them out are exorbitant relative to the benefits that it would get. So we can't even get to the discussion about whether or not they have the responsibility, or whether or not they have that role, because the rule is really poorly done at this point.
Gotcha. And to that, you mentioned the overwhelming compliance costs of this rule. How would that adversely affect the American people who rely so heavily on your industry?
Well, as an example, if we again, Congressman, go back to those Class C rural gathering lines, these are small gathering lines in very rural areas with small operators that would really bear the burden of a lot of those costs. They just don't have the capability. And again, we're not getting any benefit from that requirement.
Okay. Let's go to Mr. Black from the Liquid Energy Pipeline Association. In your testimony, you mentioned how pipelines deliver millions of gallons more energy per incident than other forms of transportation. Even the Secretary of Energy herself said pipelines are the best way to transport these fuels. Can you explain why that is and why it's important to our constituents back home who are concerned about hazardous materials moving through their communities?
Yeah, pipelines are the best way to move the energy we need at scale. Why? One, it's the lowest cost option of moving energy that we use. Two, there are less safety incidents regarding liquid pipelines than the other mode. And three, there are less GHG emissions relating to moving that transportation.
So it actually, using pipelines in itself helps greenhouse gas emissions, thereby helping the climate, right?
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. You'd think they'd know that, right? Now, many of you know this is my last hearing in Congress, so I do want to reminisce a little bit. You know, it was 2021, and I know you all remember this well. During the response to the Colonial Pipeline cyber incident, it underscored how important pipelines were to move fuels, feedstocks, and natural gas safely and efficiently. But we were all struck, I think, by the remarks from then Energy Secretary Granholm, who will certainly not miss me on this committee, I can assure you, when I'm gone, talking about the infeasibility of meeting America's fuel needs with trucks and trains alone. And she said that famous quote, pipe is the best way to go. She's right, and I'll give her credit for telling the truth, at least that one time. A couple of years later, it's clear that her colleagues in the administration, unfortunately, weren't listening to her. We have to preserve and expand the pipeline infrastructure in this country to deliver the oil, gas, and fuels that the American people rely on every day. To our witnesses today, please keep telling the truth about what you do and what your industry members do. You need to use your budgets. I'm looking at you guys, API. Especially, you have to keep beating that drum, telling the story. And with that, it has been a pleasure serving with all of you on Energy and Commerce and this subcommittee over these many years. And Mr. Chairman, for the final time, I will respond with, I yield back.
Well, I'll take a point of personal privilege here and say what an honor it has been to serve with Bill, and he's been a great member of the committee, great member of the 2010 class of Congress. We came in together, and he's been a friend to so many of us in Congress. Your wisdom and leadership will be missed on this committee and in this Congress. We wish you well as you take on the new challenge at the university, and appreciate your hard service and dedication to this nation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. With that, I'll recognize Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is going to be for Mr. Caram. One area in this bill that I think we can strengthen is the penalties for tampering with or destroying pipeline infrastructure. Since 2009, one Arizona gas company has experienced more than 140 instances of vandalism to its pipeline facilities in central Arizona alone. In February 2021, suspected metal theft resulted in the release of gas and an ignition from a high-pressure pipeline in Arizona. This ignition damaged the 7th Street Bridge, which is located in the heavily populated city of Phoenix, Arizona. Not only is this happening, but it is being encouraged by radical climate activists. Last year, a book turned movie titled How to Blow Up a Pipeline was released, which suggests to viewers the intentional destruction of energy infrastructure as a means to pursuing climate goals. Also, just this past Sunday, the New York Times wrote an article about the book and its author justifying and promoting the extreme viewpoints that include, quote, I want sabotage to happen on a much larger scale than it does now. I can't guarantee that it won't come with accidents, unquote. With messages like this being conveyed to the American public, damage to pipeline infrastructure is not likely to decline anytime soon. The Biden administration's focus on environmental justice is giving billions of dollars in grants to like-minded community organizers to promote these violent ideas. My question for you, Mr. Caram, is does the Pipeline Safety Trust oppose acts to damage or destroy an interstate national gas or hazardous liquids pipeline facility?
Yes, the Pipeline Safety Trust opposes activities that create unsafe conditions for people and the environment on pipeline facilities.
Thank you. Does PST consider acts to damage or destroy an interstate natural gas or hazardous liquids pipeline facility a protected expression of First Amendment free speech rights?
That is outside of the scope of my expertise to comment on. First Amendment rights and all, I'm not an attorney, but we do oppose acts that create unsafe conditions on pipeline facilities.
Thank you. Does PST consider acts to damage or destroy an interstate natural gas or hazardous liquids pipeline facility an appropriate form of protest against climate change?
Again, we oppose any kind of activity that creates unsafe conditions on pipeline facilities.
Thank you. My second question will be to all the panelists. Mr. Chairman, as you well know, this committee overwhelmingly passed in a bipartisan manner and on the floor in a bipartisan manner my Save Our Gas Stoves Act. As this administration continues to weaponize the regulatory process against natural gas, like they did with gas stoves, we must act and stop them. The Energy and Commerce draft contains important provisions in our bill versus the Transportation and Infrastructure Pipes Act to do this. One such provision is protecting fuel choice for consumers. This section prohibits a state or municipality from banning the transportation of an energy source, including natural gas or liquid fuels, that are sold in interstate commerce using a pipeline facility regulated by the Pipeline Hazardous Materials and Safety Administration. This is necessary since the Biden administration continues its war on fossil fuels and Americans' choice of consumer products and the energy they desire. My question for all panelists, and we'll just start from the left, Do you support this provision in the Pipeline Safety Modernization and Expansion Act of 2023, the bill that we're talking about? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Yes, Congresswoman, Liquid Energy Pipeline Association supports that. We believe consumers should be free to choose the fuel that they use.
The American Public Gas Association supports it as well. We believe the homeowner is best suited to pick the appliance that meets his needs or her needs.
This provision is outside of the scope of the mission of the Pipeline Safety Trust.
It is not outside our scope, Congresswoman, and we do believe that consumers should have the choice to choose the fuel that they want to use.
Great, and I'm glad that you put it in the bill. It's very important. I'm over my time, so I yield back. Thank you all for being here.
Generally yields back. Mr. Balderson's recognized, someone that knows about gas, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. My first question is for Mr. Black and Mr. Rorick from API. The pipeline industry measures pipeline safety based on incidents impacting people or the environment. Can you discuss why this is a good measure to track pipeline safety? Mr. Rorick, you can go first.
Me? Okay.
Yeah.
This was based off of a recommendation from NTSB years ago in an effort to try to sort out the copious amounts of data that industry was submitting to PHMSA. So their recommendation was to come up with an agreed-upon method to try to sort the data to better assess the risk. And so the identifying incidents impacting people or the environment was something that Mr. Caram's predecessor, industry, and PHMSA all agreed to as an appropriate approach to look at data.
Okay, Mr. Black.
The goal of pipeline safety regulation is to protect people in the environment, and that's the priority. We want to focus there. Some incidents are small, don't affect anybody. Some are considered significant only because of cleanup costs that have nothing to do with whether people or the environment are affected. So we believe that incidents impacting people in the environment, which the trades all agreed to and PHMSA tracks, is the proper metric and what Congress and others should be focused on.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up for both of you. I understand pipeline incidents impacting people or the environment that are caused by equipment failure have fallen by over 42% over the last 5 years. Can you discuss what steps your member companies have taken to reduce these incidents? And do you believe the draft bill we're discussing today will further reduce incidents in the future?
Sure. So there are a number of provisions in the bill that would help further accelerate some of the opportunities to continue to reduce these incidents even further. For instance, Mr. Schryver mentioned earlier the information sharing, the voluntary information sharing provisions that are in there. We've talked about technology and the opportunities for the permit process to facilitate use of better and newer technology. So there are a number of opportunities. We look at managing these incidents from a perspective of both technology, but then also behavior. And we are trying to tackle it on multiple fronts with as broad a perspective as we can to make sure that we've got the most holistic approach to the matter.
Thank you.
The industry wants to learn from any pipeline incident to achieve the goal of zero incidents. So if something happens or almost happened, industry will share information across the industry and try to develop a best practice or a recommended practice even. This is faster than the PHMSA rulemaking process. So we want to share a result of a lesson, a best practice, and get that implemented. The Pipeline Safety Enhancement Program, which you all are going to be saving, I think will further help by AI, machine learning, something new about equipment failures or other causes. We'll be able to demonstrate that a new analytic or technology works and get that modernized in PHMSA regulation. So thank you for including that.
All right, thank you. Mr. Black, in your testimony, you note that canceling or denying pipeline project is actually worse for the environment than allowing a pipeline to go forward. Can you expand on why that's the case and the potential environmental benefits of building out pipelines?
Well, a pipeline, if it's not built, the products that the Americans need for their energy uses are going to be moved on other modes. Those other modes cost more. They have more incidents. They have more GHG emissions. So canceling a pipeline project doesn't stop the fuel from being used. It just moves on more expensive, less safe, and more environmentally emitting methods. So We believe that it's important for a pipeline project that qualifies for its permits to be able to get the permit. You've got permitting reforms in your draft that the subcommittee chairman worked on. There's more that Congress generally should be doing on permitting reform as well to make sure that Americans get those benefits.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to run out of time probably, so I yield back my remaining time. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Now conclude the hearing today. And one thing about the Energy Subcommittee is we have long hearings, and I appreciate everyone's perseverance there. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here today. Members may have additional written questions for you guys. I'll remind members they have 10 days to submit additional questions for the record. Ask witnesses to do their best to submit responses within 10 business days upon receipt of the questions. I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record any documents included on the staff hearing documents list. Without objection, that will be the order. And thanks, guys. Look forward to working with everyone on the committee as we move this draft forward and hopefully get to a markup. With that, I yield back.